All right, ladies and gentlemen, in the interest of time management and being on time, we want to get started. Obviously, we'll still have some people coming in. And we also have our audio visual. You guys ready to go? This meeting, by the way, is being recorded. So you may see yourself on a YouTube video. First of all, I'd like to thank everyone for showing up. This is the second road show. It is being recorded. It'll go out. This will be the one that goes out for distribution for people to view. And thank you to everyone from LA. I'm Joel Gutierrez. I'm your council chair on behalf of UPA23. Where are you, Ipe? There he is, Ipe. He's your FO rep, vice chair. And then Greg Everhart, secretary treasurer. Greg, here he is coming in. It's kind of like we introduce him from, there he is. Thank you. Those are your reps, assuming you're from Los Angeles. And thanks everyone here for participating in this process. This has been, and as you know, an arduous process, and it brings us to this day. So thanks everyone for participating, for being on the picket line, for helping out, for voicing your opinions, for giving your input, and that's the result you're going to see here today. One of the things on that note is, as we begin to discuss this, we have the most esteemed group of people here. I'm going to introduce Garth in just a second, but our negotiating committee, Andy Riggs, Phil Otis, Steve, yep, yeah, Radican, we got Adrian, and our Tom. Nate. What's that? Sorry, Nathan. Sorry, Nate, our attorney. So these are our subject matter experts. They're going to be able to describe, to explain in the detail that you're looking for. So one thing interesting about this place, it's the only place. This is the Proud Bird Restaurant. So we're kind of bringing old back. It's like this has historical significance for Council 57. For anyone that's not been here for more than, say, 10 years, I don't think we've done a meeting here in a long time. So there's some renovation going on, or there was renovations that went on, and so we just moved away from it. But this is the exact same location where we came to discuss the road show for Contract 2000. So if anyone remembers that, and also, 9/11 was just two days ago. It was also where we met to figure out what our next steps were during 9/11. So this place has a lot of historical significance for Council 57, a lot of history. So if you get a chance, take a look at some of the airplanes, and I think it looks like they've kind of made it more family friendly. Anyway, so with that, I just want to say thanks everyone. Thanks to our great negotiating team and all the subject matter experts for what they've done. It's been a huge process, and we've been like right there at ground zero doing it, being a part of it. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce Garth Thompson, who's going to kick off this meeting. Thanks, Garth.
Thanks, Joel, and Ipe and Greg. Appreciate it. Thank you all for being here. I know it takes, especially in LA in the morning, it takes a bit of an effort to get out for a meeting. I appreciate you being here. I want to introduce just a few other people that are in the room that have worked tirelessly on our behalf. Our executive administrator, Quincy Fleming, is over in the very bright shirt. See, we have our MEC our MEC treasurer here, Drew Minarsik. We have our system schedule committee chair and our R&I chair, if you both can, Fred Green and George Mladsey. Who else am I? We have communications committee. Raise your hand, guys. Michael Wilson, chair. We call him trash because we have too many Michaels. Mike Hastings back there, our vice. Liz Whiting, office manager for us, has been here since March with us. Michael Batkins, where are you? Our staff communications specialist. Paul Card from Economic and Financial Analysis. We also have more Dan White for R&I legal expert. Dave Whitwer and Dewey Duhadaway. So anyhow, we have again a small army on the road to support this roadshow effort. If I missed anybody, my apologies. Regardless of your opinions on this tentative agreement, all these people before you here today deserve our appreciation and respect. They've devoted a large part of their lives over the last several months to get us to where we are today. And so I hope you have a chance to express your appreciation to them. Others that aren't here today that certainly deserve our recognition are the Strategic Preparedness and Strike Committee, other committees that weighed in and helped with the negotiation process. pilot to pilot volunteers, certainly the FAC team. Are there any FAC team people here? They're probably working. So anyway, thanks. Any local committee types here? Oh, Shirley. Okay, thank you. Thanks for what you do. We are always in search of new blood, and we, if you haven't contributed to this pilot group, I do ask that you strongly consider doing it. At the FAC team training that we conducted at the end of August, I asked for a show of hands amongst the 85 people there for training, who here is doing volunteer work for the first time, and it was a surprising number of people that came forward for that effort. And so I hope they just are getting started with it, and I hope some of you that are fairly new to United will consider it as well. That helps keep us connected with each other as far as leadership and the membership, and also keeps our ideas from becoming stale. Most important today, though, is this tentative agreement came about because of all of us. Our unity through this process, certainly the picketing and the show of support for each other was a real force, and that helped us get across the finish line as far as getting to an AIP. And whether you end up voting for the tentative agreement or not, you were a part of getting here today, and I appreciate you. This agreement shouldn't have taken as long as it did. It was a very frustrating, grinding process, and it will impact this company all the way through next summer. But that is not on you. And we will continue forward. We will implement this agreement if it's ratified, and we will do our part to ensure the success of this company. But it wasn't your fault that it took us this long to get here today. But we are here today. And now it's all in our hands as far as what we do about this agreement. I'm, for one, very thankful that we have membership ratification. It can be a contentious process, a messy process, an expensive process, and a lengthy process, and it's worth every bit of it. For those of us that have been around here a little while, we've witnessed more than one time, at least two in the top of my head, where membership ratification saved us from a poor decision. And I believe this last year was one of those times. So take your vote seriously. I know you have, because you're here today. We've gone to great lengths to provide you with unbiased information during this review process, whether it's online with our podcasts and executive summaries and redline documents, contract comparisons, and also this roadshow is an extension of that. We're here today just to give information, to ask questions. We're not here to sell anything. And I guess I'll leave it with, I hope you leave here today happy that you came and that you know more about the agreement than before you showed up this morning. I thank you again for being here. I'll start off with Captain Phil Otis, Chairman of our negotiating committee.
Sorry. Thanks, everyone. Good morning. And it is a pleasure to be back. Few of you know I was based here at one time. I was actually the first officer rep for 5 years during the bankruptcy years. So that was a memory I don't necessarily want to relive as far as the bankruptcy, but the privilege of serving Council 57 is one of the great highlights of my career here at United. And it's an honor again to be in front of all of you, in front of the entire pilot group for that matter, presenting the tentative agreement. Positive, negative comments, all welcome, because those to me mean that you're engaged, you're passionate, and I don't take offense to anything that's asked, any comments that come up. So please feel free. I'm sure you will. If I remember Council 57 well, that will carry forward. I'm sure that we will get excellent participation in that area. But again, thank you, all of you, for your unity. And rather than bore you with more comments, I'm going to get right into the presentation. 300 changes to the UPA, really more like 360 or so. 21 out of 25 sections modified. Wages alone, $5.4 billion, $1.7 billion in QWL, quality of work life items. Retro payments, another 1.2. Benefit improvements alone, over $1 billion, 1.1. And then 0.8, so almost $1 billion scattered around other areas. So that's over 10 billion total. And the question I get a lot, I got it by email, by casual conversation, phone calls, and in fact, in the first road shows, was that as much as we could get? And the real answer is a little more nuanced. It's a balance, right? It's not something we do alone. We do that in concert with the MEC officers, the MEC as a whole. And what we're doing is judging the value balance of, did we achieve enough? Is there more that we have to do to get more value? If we don't want to do certain things, we get less value, right? We started out in January of this year, roughly about $5 billion apart from the company. We were obviously above the point that we reached. They were well below it, in our estimation, well below even where our peers were at that point in time. And it took until the summer to get to a point where we were surpassing our peers by enough without having to do anything that we thought was not in the best pilot interest, to put a package together to bring the MEC, evaluate it, and then bring it out to you for ratification. So that's the long answer, I guess, to that question. It depends, and really it depends on you all. And that's what we're here to present and give you that choice. The contract changes alone, not counting United Next or growth that the airline is anticipating over the next few years, will require over 1,000 additional pilots throughout the life of the agreement. And that's based upon a variety of areas. Vacation probably accounts for the majority of it. In terms of the higher value and the higher credit that goes into PBS, that's just going to require more pilots over the years of the agreement. Then the other areas mentioned there, trip construction, more sick accrual, because of course the company assumes we're going to use it all, and improvements to the reserve structure make things just a little less efficient from a staffing point of view, so that the airline requires more pilots. So I'm going to hand it over to Captain Andy Riggs. Great history on the scheduling committee, and many of you may have even dealt with him without knowing the face as one of our crew scheduling oversight ALPA volunteers that was on the floor at the Network Operations Center. And here he is.
Hey, good morning. Good to be here. So we've broken this down into three big classifications. I'm going to cover two of them. The quality of life changes and improvements for line holders and reserve, and then Phil will come back up and talk about the benefit changes. So first off, we'll start with quality of life for line holders. So how we got to these items, the polling was very clear of what our pilots wanted to see. Polling, survey data, your feedback through your reps, local council resolutions that ended up on the MEC floor. The negotiating committee is not necessarily a good idea committee. All ideas don't flow from our minds. That's not our charge. Our charge is to take direction from the MEC, and that direction comes via local council resolution through your reps onto the floor, and then also survey and polling data. We also look to our peers at Delta and American, and some of our peers, sometimes at Southwest or Spirit as appropriate, to get ideas from them. And one of the things that came up, what you may have noticed late in this cycle, was American actually paused their contract negotiations because they saw things through our transparency. Garth led the effort for us to be transparent throughout the process, and that resulted in our peers at American and APA pausing and saying, hey, they've already obtained this and they're not done yet. We're going to need some of those things. So that was a point of pride for us, that we were able to achieve some things that you guys gave us the ideas for that improved the industry. We wanted to see gains in the quality of work life, and what that translates as is improved time off, went away from United, not just money. So some of the irritants in the contract in the past were addressed with just pay, just saying, hey, we'll use pay to cover the multitude of sins over there, but what we're going to use now going forward is trying to eliminate those to the extent possible. We looked to tackle those problems with incentives to attract volunteers. So if there's a pilot who says that doesn't seem as offensive to me, I would be happy to have that happen to me in exchange for that amount of money, that pilot could step up and have that assignment or reassignment in lieu of someone who did not want to have that happen. And then when insufficient volunteers exist, protections going forward. In addition to improving the quality of life, we focused on improving our benefits. So we'll start with vacation, and of course vacation applies to reserves as well, but we'll talk about the impact on a line holder. 2024-2025 vacation year, we start out with a 4 hour, 15 minutes of pay and $3.45 of credit. That vacation year starts in May of this next year. In May of 2025, that vacation year, we go to $4.15 of pay and credit. Obviously, the pay is a financial impact. The credit, because the credit is delayed in rolling in, this is similar to what happened with Delta and their company and APA and American. The credit is usually what lags a little bit. The reason for that is there's a staffing implication. The more credit that we get for a day of vacation is going to result in us working fewer days in that bid period, which is a great thing. That's something that we like, but that requires additional staffing, and along with additional staffing, they're required to hire, train, get those folks out on the line. The result of this pay and credit setup is we have more time off with the same number of vacation days as today. There's a chart that we have available that we can share with you that depending on how many days of availability in the bid period and how many weeks of vacation, the average line holder results in 1 to 2 additional days off in the bid period than they would today. We have additional protections when a pilot changes categories. One of the issues that a pilot must consider today under the UPA, if you're changing categories, and that may be as simple as going LA 787 FO to San Fran 787 FO. If you're looking to chase some flying and just go up the coast a little bit, you stand to lose all of your awarded vacation that you had bid and awarded in your current category. And it may be so late in the vacation year that you might not be able to rebid that vacation, and that vacation is going to be deposited into your retirement account the following June. One of the downsides to our current contract is when that does occur, you lose the retirement contribution from the company into your B and C plan. Going forward, a couple of changes there. One, you have the ability to protect some vacation when you go to a new category. You also are going to be entitled to the retirement contribution on any vacation that is forfeited going forward. Part of the change to the vacation is the elimination of flying for free. That's what we call it when a pilot picks up a trip in a bid period where their MPG is leading and their LPV or PTC is behind MPG. MPG does not change throughout a bid period, meaning that it cannot go up. If you trade down, MPG can decrease, but it does not increase. So if you are awarded 1 or 2 weeks of vacation and your MPG is leading, we'll say MPG is leading by 4 or 5 hours, the first 4 or 5 hours that you pick up. So if you pick up a 20-hour trip, you're only going to realize the increase of 16 hours. That's why pilots say flying for free. That's been eliminated going forward starting in the May 2024 vacation month because line holder MPG will be eliminated. So that upside down issue goes away. Trip construction. So we're going from M5D to M515 daily average. We're the only airline with a 515 daily average and a monthly build cap of 90 hours. What that really translates to is for pilots that are available for a full bid period, that's an additional day off for those line holders because today, 18 days of work times 5 hours of pay equals 90 hours. That meets the cap. Going forward, going to 515, 18 days of work times 515 would exceed the 90-hour cap. So the company has to build you lower than that, resulting in an additional day off. All-night flight rules, I know that's near and dear to everyone on the West Coast. We just met with our San Francisco-based pilots yesterday. This is a big issue that you guys deal with out here, mostly due to your geographic location and the schedule that United publishes. But what we've looked to work on here, back in 2018, for those of you that were here, there was a crew rest study that was conducted by the Fatigue Review Committee. It was called DCAS, Domestic Crew Alertness Study. Kyle Opp, can you wave Kyle? Kyle Opp started out on your local scheduling committee. Now he's a part of the system schedule committee, and he's your pairings expert on there. I worked with Kyle when I was on the Fatigue Review Committee. He also does Fatigue Review Committee. I worked with Kyle back then in conjunction with the study, and we were working hard to identify the pairings that have onerous aspects to them, mostly associated with all-night flying, and looking to isolate and identify what the mitigations could be put in place for those for the pairing quality to increase, for them to be less fatiguing and more safe. These rules are the results of that study. We worked hard during the pandemic with the decrease in flying to get the company used to using these rules. Once the pandemic closed out in 2022, the company reverted back to their original pairing rules, and we saw these things come back. We have finally, with the TA, we've finally been able to put a nail on those and largely eliminate them or mitigate them going forward. So we'll get into those. The ANF rules, we changed the ANF window to be more widespread and to capture more flights, categorize them as all-night flying. As a result, more trips fall into the guidelines or the restrictions under 5E10G going forward, which limits the duty day length in those trips. Some of the other things that come into play for those of you that worked at Legacy United before, you remember there was a 16:45 min time off between an all-night flight. That prevents what we call the day layover. This may not be as common out here as when we go to New York and DC and talk to those pilots, but the day layover is fly a flight from the East Coast typically into a West Coast city, land 8, 9 in the morning, go to bed and go back out that night on a red eye. That's now going to require 16 hours and 45 minutes off prior to doing that. We also achieved a restriction on the long duty day after an ANF and day layover. So this would be something you are more likely to see in Los Angeles. The all-night flight to the East Coast, day layover. So you get into New York or DC or Boston or what have you at 8 in the morning and you're scheduled to go back out at 6 or 7 o'clock that night. You're now going to be restricted on a one-leg duty day to 9 hours of FTP. And if you're doing 2 legs and it's a 2-leg cap, no more than 2 to 6.5 hours. That eliminates the pairings that we've seen in the past where you fly New York to Denver, have a 2-hour sit and continue on to Medford or Eugene. It also eliminates, we had some 3-leg duty periods that were exceeding 9 hours of duty after an all-night flight and day layover. So this corrects that. We have a limitation on no more than 1 ANF in the trip. We also have a limitation that you can't have more legs than, or more duty periods than the number of days in the trip. You guys are familiar with this likely from, you may see 1 leg to Denver, the first flight in the morning to Denver in the morning, day layover in Denver and fly the last flight home. That's just to get rid of any soft time in that trip. That will no longer be legal. There's also a horrible Tampa trip that Neil back there flew, or he has on his schedule if somebody wants to take it from him. It's a horrible 3-leg, 3 duty period, 2-day trip that's being built today that will no longer be legal. Another work rule that we've achieved is a minimum calendar day. It's a penalty that influences the pairing optimizer to evenly balance the block time over all days of the trip. Some might refer to this as dead day pay. We don't refer to it as that only because it doesn't require that there be no flying in that duty day. An example of when this could come into play for you guys out here is the 11:55 departure, the red eye going out of here at night. You would be credited with 2.5 hours of minimum LPV for that first day of the trip. So if you have 5 hours of flight time in day 1, you would get 2 hours and 25 minutes as a plug. Similarly, if you were to leave here at 12:30 in the morning, you have an 11:30 at night report on day 1, there would be no flying in there, so you would get a 2.5 hour plug. There's examples of that in section 5 of the TA and the back of section 5 in the appendix that show you how that comes into play. The long duty day rig, this works in conjunction with the minimum calendar day to balance the amount of block time over all the days of the trip. This prevents the company from having short duty days, what we've typically seen in the past. They'll do a long duty day up front, long duty day on day 4, and then barely use you on days 2 and 3. What this provides is a limitation on, or a pay implication, penalty to them if they schedule you or you actually have longer than a 10-hour duty day. So longer than a 10-hour duty day scheduled or actual going forward is going to pay on a 1-to-1 rig. So if you leave here and you're scheduled to do an 8-hour duty day, you're scheduled to fly to Houston, sit for an hour and a half and fly back, and the airplane breaks or there's thunderstorms in Houston and you land back here 11.5 hours after you left, you would get an hour and a half of ad pay for that. It's scheduled or actual. Long sit time rig, this is to prevent long sits in the hub. Any scheduled sit over 2.5 hours is going to pay that long sit time rig. That's to prevent the company from flying in the morning and having long sits throughout the day, throughout your trip for block, or to deal with the hub, the timing. What do you call this? Push times. Yeah, the push times in and out of the hub. So that's to prevent that. And then lastly, the contractual basic trip mix. That's to prevent degradation in the trip mix that you see today. This just codifies what the company has agreed to do with the SSC today to make sure that if the optimizer, which takes all the legs and builds pairings to the most efficient way possible, still contractually compliant, FAR legal, it prevents them from producing, say, all 4 and 5 day trips for pilots here. It specifies a minimum number of 1 and 2 day trips, as well as a maximum of the longer length trips to protect the quality of life in the base. Okay, the next thing for line holders is day off restoration, the changes there. This is something that as I joined the committee in April and we began to compare with our peers at Delta and American and across the industry really, each airline deals with reassignments and the actual operation differently. And one thing that was very surprising to me is the lack of day off restoration provisions at our competitors. This is something I feel like maybe I guess I took for granted, that when you lose a day off and due to a reassignment that you're entitled to day off restoration. Our peers at American and Delta don't enjoy that. So these are things that we not only were able to continue having, but we're able to institute improvements going forward. So the first big improvement is for the 777 and 787 fleet. Specifically for Los Angeles pilots, the 787 fleet, restoration is available starting with the first disrupted day off on a reassignment or long delay. The current contract says the first day off that you lose, you're not entitled to restoration. Going forward, that first day off and subsequent on that trip. So if you're doing say a 3-day Tokyo out of here Monday through Wednesday, and you get reassigned or long delayed to come back on Thursday, you're going to be entitled to have that day off restored. If for some reason something happens and you're delayed 2 days coming back, you would get both of those days off restored. The way this system works with the wide body, though, is once you restore that day off under 20 November 3, if it results in AV for a trip, so you call and you restore the day and they restore it over a Sydney or Melbourne. So the 4-day Sydney drops out, you have 1 day restored, so now you owe the company 3 days of AV. The company has up until 1500 the day prior to the AV block to give you replacement flying. If they don't have replacement flying for you at 1500 the day prior to that block, your obligation to the company no longer exists. Those are considered days off for you for minimum day off purposes. You can trip trade, you can pick up, or you can enjoy the additional time off. There will be an accounting of how many days off you had that you were awarded at the beginning of the month. So let's say you're awarded 18 days off. You flew that Tokyo trip. We're talking about the same pilot here. Flew the Tokyo trip, came back a day late, got a day off restored. So now you're back up to, what did I say? 18, thanks. You're back up to 18 days off. But now you had those 3 AV days that went unused. So now you're at 21 days off. As a result of that counter that's going, if you are reassigned or get back a day late on a subsequent trip in the bid period, you won't be eligible for further restoration until that ticker goes back down to 18 days off. So we weren't able to obtain it just like the 737 and Airbus pilots enjoy today, but it was a step forward for the first lost day off. As we looked at the schedules and the history on this, it was fairly rare for a wide body pilot to have multiple trips in the bid period that resulted in day off loss. So this was a step that we were comfortable in taking and the achievement that we were willing to get off the table from the company. Next up, the 756 fleet. If you're on the 756 today, you know that your day off restoration varies by bid period. It's going to be based on the average number of days off in your category. If the average number of days off in your category is 18 or greater, you're not eligible for day off restoration. Unfortunately, the way that language reads, it doesn't mean that you had 18 days off or more in the bid periods. It's your category. So if your category, the average was 18 days off or more, and you had 14 days off, you would not be eligible for restoration. Going forward, the 756 fleet is treated just like the 737 and Airbus fleet. All days off are eligible for restoration on the 756 fleet, regardless of where you're based. Okay, for all fleets, deadheads are now considered a reassignment and eligible for day off restoration. This goes back a long ways, as far as the people who've been here a long time have told me, that a deadhead on a day off is not considered a reassignment by definition. It's not considered new flying, and as a result, you're not entitled to day off restoration. after answering definitely hundreds of PDRs over the last 10 years for pilots and telling them, yes, unfortunately, you're not entitled to day off restoration. This is a big improvement for our pilots. Our families don't care if you sat in the cockpit or the flight deck coming home a day late, or if you sat in the back deadheading. All they know is that you got home a day late, and they want to see some compensation, and not just financially. They want to be able to see that you're getting to make up that time. So family members, dogs, cats, everybody's happy when you can get home on time, or at least get that day restored. So we were able to achieve that going forward. Additional time off protections. For golden days off, GDOs, reassignments are now prohibited into GDOs. I think a lot of times pilots may think that GDOs are always protected. Unfortunately, they're not. GDOs today under our current contract are simply pre-assigned days off. You can bid for them beginning in May for the vacation year. And you just know that if you're awarded that when you pull up your PBS for bidding, you see those days off and they're set. However, out on the line, you're not protected. Those are considered just like normal days off today. Going forward, those GDOs carry the same protection as a vacation day. You cannot be reassigned or scheduled to operate into those days. You can be required to remain with an aircraft that is down for mechanical, which is similar today with vacation. The company is required to attempt to get you back in a reasonable manner. But if that occurs, unlike today, if you lose your GDOs going forward, if you are required to babysit a broken airplane to bring it back, you're entitled to get those GDOs back and bid them again later in the vacation year. Also, we achieved the ability to be removed from a reassignment that transits your base on or after the last day of your trip. So let's say you're flying a 4-day trip Monday through Thursday, and on Wednesday you're reassigned in a contractually compliant way to get back to your base on Friday. Since you're reassigned on Wednesday to get back on a day off, and that occurs before 1400 on Thursday, before your day off is disrupted, you're entitled to contact the crew desk and ask to be removed from that. And if they have an available reserve, they're required to do that. If the reassignment occurs after 1400 on the disrupted day off, there is no contractual entitlement. We've had this question come up, well, what prevents the company from just waiting until after 1400? We have a variety of protections in there. Designated assignment windows when open flying must be assigned. They can't sit on open flying that's available on Friday. If it's available on Wednesday, they have to get that covered. If they're open legs, they can't sit on that. That's what would prevent that going forward. Okay, so moving on to the reserve, some of the reserve improvements and changes. Since we're 16,000 pilots strong, and our pilots, some live in base, some live close to the airport, some, especially in California, don't commute per se, but drive 2.5 hours to get to the airport. And then we have our pilots that live all over the world and commute. The idea of our current reserve system working for all of our pilots is we've frankly outgrown it. So we looked at what's available at our competitor carriers, and frankly, they're lacking as well. Our competitors also do a long call, short call model, but there's a lot of opportunity for that long call pilot to get drug in and be kept on a tighter leash to the airport. So what we looked to achieve was multiple different voluntary types of reserve while still maintaining a traditional reserve aspect that is available to all pilots. I'll go over the new reserve types here and some of the accoutrements and how they work. With the exception of traditional reserve, the last one, all the other reserve types are voluntary. So if it doesn't work for you and that's not something you're interested in, there's no way to get junior manned into it or forced into one of those types of reserve. So a voluntary early check line. A voluntary early check, it enables a company to assign you early assignments on the first day of reserve. Today we enjoy what we refer to as the 10 a.m. rule. Unfortunately, when you look in our current contract, there is no 10 a.m. rule. The 10 a.m. rule today exists as a result of an FAA interpretation that says our requirement in our contract today to check your schedule on your last day off prior to reserve constitutes a break and rest, and the company must account for that when accounting for your FAR 117 calculations. Similarly to how the contract was negotiated to allow the company access to us early on day one, and that interpretation is the only thing holding that off. Today, as it exists, our contract is one interpretation away from that going away. So the 10 a.m. rule isn't contractual, it's just held on a 3-page piece of paper from the FAA. We're able to codify that going forward. The 10 a.m. rule will actually be in the contract, that without your concurrence, the company doesn't have access to our reserves before 10 a.m. This really results in an additional night at home for most of our reserves that commute. That's why it was so important to reserves and what they expressed to us and the feedback that we received. So these voluntary early check pilots are volunteering to be available early on their first day of reserve. In exchange for that, they're entitled to 2 hours of ad pay per block of reserve awarded in PBS. So a typical basic reserve has 4 blocks of reserve. This reserve would start off the bid period 73 hours of MPG and 8 hours of ad pay for that availability, whether they're used early on day one or not. These reserves, when they're not sitting short call, would be on a 12-hour long call out time. Today, the long call is 13 hours to depart. These pilots would be available for 12 hours to report. We call that out because that's different than long call going forward. Long call going forward will be an 18-hour call out going forward. In exchange for these pilots not having a short call cap, meaning they can be assigned as many short calls as necessary throughout the bid period, they're also entitled to 15 minutes of ad pay per reserve day. So assuming the reserve has 18 days of reserve in the bid period, that's going to be 4.5 hours of ad pay as a result of the 15 minutes per day of reserve, plus 8 hours for each early block, 2 times 4 for each early block. So that's going to be 12.5 hours. This reserve is going to start with 85.5 hours of pay at the beginning of the bid period. They would also be entitled to the late assigned, any short call built after 1400. It's going to pay an hour of ad pay. The unused short calls, they're going to be entitled to the ad pay or MPG increase as appropriate there before 10 a.m. pays those accoutrements that are in there. They're entitled to all those as well. This is just a start at the bid period for the availability that they guarantee up front. Okay, so voluntary short call lines. This is similar, but a little different. These pilots who volunteer for a voluntary short call line are not available before 10 a.m. Before 10 a.m. on their first day of reserve, unless they choose to be. There's no entitlement to the company on those. They achieve an additional MPG as a result of being no cap on short calls. They're entitled to 20 minutes of increased MPG per day of reserve. So 18 days of reserve, 20 minutes per day, that's 6 hours of MPG increase. So this pilot who has a full month of availability, 18 days of reserve, would start the bid period at, well, I'm kind of bearing the headline here. Reserve MPG increases from 403 a day to 417 a day. So in a bid period where they have 18 days of work, they'd start out at 77.18 plus 4.5. So I went to Oklahoma Public Schools, so you can do the math. The important thing here is VECs and VECs cannot coexist in a category. The reason for that is we didn't want the company to go on the cheap and say, we'll offer 1 or 2 VECs in LA, and those should cover the early morning departures. But we don't want to pay the 2 hours of ad pay per block and the 15 minutes of ad pay per day of reserve. We'll just do like 1 or 2 of those to cover those morning departures, and then everyone else will put on VSC. They have to offer either VEC or VSC on those narrow body categories that have majority of departures or have some departures before 10 a.m., the early morning departures. For other categories that don't have a lot of early morning departures, they can offer the VSCs. The next one that kind of layers in this cake is the voluntary long call line. This is the pure long call. So you cannot be involuntarily assigned short calls. You would have however many days of reserve awarded to you, and you would be on long call at all times. Long call in the assignment window from 12 to 2 each day, you would have a 14-hour call out. That would allow the company to assign you a trip. If they assigned you at 13:59, that you could be required to report as early as 3:59 in the morning. After 2 p.m. though, that reverts back to an 18-hour call out. And then lastly, traditional reserve. Traditional reserve is guaranteed to every reserve pilot. If you decide not to bid for or not awarded one of the other voluntary reserve types that we talked about previously, you have a cap on short calls. This is something that our pilots gave us feedback on loud and clear. Tired of the abuse from the crew desk putting everyone on short call because they can. There's going to be a hard cap of 6 short calls that can be assigned to you throughout the bid period. Those 6 short calls, once they're assigned to you, you are no longer eligible for a short call unless you decide to voluntarily pick one up. If you decide to pick up a short call here and there, it's a cap of assigned short calls. So you could pick up 3 and the crew desk could assign you 6 and that would be compliant. The reason why would the company offer VECs or VSCs? Those are a counterbalance to the voluntary long call line. The company has to offer a minimum of 15% of the total number of reserves in your category, a long call only line. A long call only line because they have a cap of 0. The voluntary early check or voluntary short call lines act as a pressure relief valve. Those are the pilots who are uncapped. They can take as many short calls as a company has necessary to build for them. So that's why they will offer those. You don't have to take our word for it. They're also required in the narrow body categories to offer those. Okay, next up on the reserve front, we'll talk about additional days off. So every reserve going forward is going to be guaranteed an extra day off in 8 bid periods a year. The bid periods exclude June, July, August, and December. We all know June, July, August, and December, why those were chosen. Those are the heavy flying bid periods. Kind of the genesis of this is we started out the gate requesting an additional or negotiating for an additional day off in all the bid periods throughout the year. The company countered that they wanted to require the reserve to bid that on an annual basis. They also wanted the reserve to self-fund that additional day off, meaning you would take a hit in MPG. Our pilots are smart, and we saw right through that. Pilots are not going to sign up for, on an annual basis, not knowing what category you're going to be in, that you're going to take essentially an MPG hit to sit one less day of reserve when they really don't need you the majority of the months out of the year. We said that's untenable. We're not going to do that. You don't need the reserves in the majority of the months out of the year, those additional reserves, and our pilots are not going to fund that additional time off. So this went back and forth from February all the way until the end of June as things started unclogging a little bit at the table. And what we're able to achieve is that additional day off 8 bid periods out of the year and no hit in pay. So those 8 bid periods out of the year where you go in the 30-day bid period, MDO would go from 12 to 13, and a 31-day bid period, MDO would go from 13 days off to 14 days off. You're still going to have an MPG of 73 hours in those bid periods. The 4 bid periods, June, July, August, and December, where you work 18 days instead of 17 days, you are going to have an additional day of reserve MPG, which pays $417.39. So in those bid periods, for 18 days of work, you're going to be paid a minimum of 77 hours and 18 minutes. We also added a pilot entitlement to have an extra day of reserve if they so choose, and high LPA bid periods. So if their LPA in your category is 77 hours or more, you can preference an additional day of reserve in PBS. Also the option with company concurrence to have the additional day off awarded after the PBS run. In those cases, you would have an additional $417.39 attached to your MPG. For VECs and VSC pilots, we talked about those previously. Those pilots are guaranteed the ability to have an extra day off if they so choose. That'll be pilot funded, meaning if you elect in PBS to have an additional day off, that would come off your guarantee of $417.39. What this really looks like is in the summer bid periods, so June, July, August, and then the holiday bid period in December, you could elect to have 13 days off in that bid period with a lower MPG. That MPG, though, would be the lower MPG. You would still see more than 73 hours of pay because you're getting the MPG for sitting 20 minutes per day for voluntary short call, or you would see the additional ad pay if you're sitting voluntary early check. And 2 or 3 months out of the year, I say 2 or 3 because April switches in the leap year. April becomes a 30-day. April becomes a 30-day bid period in the leap year. So in April, March, April, and May, I believe it is, those are 30-day bid periods. And in those 30-day bid periods, the MDO is 13. You would be entitled to a 14th day off if you're VEC or VSC. And the other 6 bid periods that are 31-day bid periods, depending on leap year, your MDO would go from 14 days off, because every reserve now has 14 days off in those bid periods, to an optional 15th day off if you so chose. For global HDOs, for pilots in the global categories, you will now have the ability to have 2 blocks of HDOs. So today you're limited to 1 block of HDOs up to 6 days in length. Going forward, you'll be able to split those up if you so choose. So you could have a 6-day block, you're still guaranteed the 6-day block, or you could have a 3 and 3 or a 2 and 4. And you have the option to not have a 6-day off block of days off. So you don't have to have a subsequent RDO block that's 6 days in length. Roll day off prevention. So for reserves, this is something we've heard loud and clear. Not only are most of their days off subject to being rolled, it seems, especially when they're out on the line being reassigned, but how do we prevent, especially for our global pilots, having half of your days off being rollable? How do we protect those days off? So we're moving to a strict assignment ladder that's designed to protect days off as the highest priority. Today, our assignment ladder starts with the crew desk having the ability to choose long call, short call, or field standby, and then going to match silo. The result of this that we see out there is sometimes they will have a pilot on short call, for example, that could be assigned the trip and not have their days off disrupted, but they'll elect to go with the long call pilot and roll a couple of days off. And we frequently hear from the long call pilot, hey, I get my days off disrupted. I'm missing some important events that I bid to have off. There's a pilot right there that doesn't require day off disruption. Unfortunately, the crew desk isn't required to use that pilot. Excuse me. Going forward, that's going to change. There's a strict assignment order that causes the crew desk to go in order of long call, short call, field standby if a pilot is available and to avoid disrupting the days off. Going forward, the company must use reserves who are volunteering to have days off rolled prior to involuntarily assigning to a reserve. You might say, why would a reserve volunteer to have their day off rolled? A couple reasons why. If you're looking at Thursday, Friday off, and maybe Thursday, Friday wasn't important to you, but you know that if they roll your Thursday and Friday off, now they're going to have to give you those days off back on Saturday, Sunday. That's typical why today a reserve might raise their hand and say, hey, roll me. There's no provision today for a reserve to volunteer to have their days off rolled when there's somebody else ahead of them in silo. The other real reason going forward is because the rolling of a day off for a reserve will pay 5 hours and 15 minutes of ad pay per day off rolled. Another requirement before they roll that day off, if there's no volunteers as a reserve, is to offer the trip to a line holder with 50% ad pay prior to being assigned to a reserve into their days off. So this would require the company to tag that trip with ad pay, put it out there, you get your open pairing alert, first look right, the trip trade system runs through with the 50% PPU attached, and if a line holder takes the trip, then that reserve days are not disrupted. Might ask, what's the purpose in that? There's a difference here in this 50% PPU than normal PPU, because we all know today if they put it out at 50% PPU, what does every pilot do? What do you do? Wait, yes. Universal. Everyone, wait. I was out in Guam doing the road show this past weekend, and we were sitting at the tiki bar the night before the road show, and the open pairing alerts were going out for the next day, and the 50% came by, and they universally looked at each other and said, don't you dare. And then 75 came out, and then 100% came out, and I was really impressed. They weren't picking it up because they'd have to miss the road show, so good on them. And then their phones started ringing. They were cold scheduling was cold calling the pilots, so they held firm. That was really awesome. But the point there is this is going to be designated different so that when you get that open pairing alert on your phone, it says 50%, you will know that trip is not going to 75 or 100. That trip, it's a going gone situation. That trip is going to be assigned to a reserve shortly thereafter and likely disrupting that reserve's day off. So that's your clue and your education piece to know if I want this trip at 50% PPU, that's as good as that pairing is going to get. And the reason why is the crew desk has coverage for that trip. They're just contractually required going forward to offer that at 50% PPU. Okay, so we covered the assignment ladder, removing the scheduler discretion on that. The assignment ladder, we also put it in the contract, both in text and table form. Today, the assignment ladder is buried in contractual language and legalese, and it's hard to follow. Now, we still have the contractual language, and that's important because that's what's enforceable going forward in agreements or in a system board. But we call it out and make it very simple, or more simple, I'll say, for our pilots and our crew schedulers to see, and our programmers as they go to program the assignment ladder, that you can see where you are in the assignment order and who should be getting the assignment. Long call notice, we covered this, the 18-hour call out for a trip, 14 hours if it's assigned in the assignment window, 16-hour long call to the start of a short call. Now, this isn't a bait and switch. Long call only pilots don't get short call. This is meaning if you're on traditional reserve because you're capped at 6 short calls a month, if you don't elect to pick up other short calls, that means you're likely to sit long call 11 or 12 days the rest of the bid period. So you're also going to enjoy the 18-hour call out. It's a 16-hour call out to the start of a short call. So if you're called out for a short call, it's 16 hours. The thought process behind that is 16 hours plus the 2.5-hour call out for a short call exceeds 18 hours. It's 18 and a half. And then lastly, pilots cannot be involuntarily assigned field standby. Pilots can agree to sit field standby. Going forward for ad pay, it's 3 hours of ad pay. Whether you're assigned off the field standby or not, you get the 3 hours of ad pay. There is a new concept in the UPA called contingency reserve. This is not meant to be a bait and switch ad pay or field standby by a different name. The original intent of field standby years ago was to protect when you have a misconnect or something happening inside that 2.5-hour call out where there's not a way to recover the operation. What it has morphed to, unfortunately, is a shorter leash by which the crew desk can keep us tethered to the airport. It's resulted in pilots suiting up, and especially for folks out here, there's a lot of effort that goes into that. And our pilots are professionals and have no problem suiting up, getting in the car, jumping in the Uber, hopping on an airplane to get to their base to fly an airplane. That's what we all signed up for in this career. We do have a problem with jumping through all those hoops only to be stuck at the airport for 4 hours because they can, and then send you home. And now you're out, the hassle of sitting in traffic, suiting up, making arrangements for childcare, all the hassles of coming to work and not actually flying a jet, which is what our main job is to do here. Now, there's a flip side. One thing that we did think about here is one thing that field standby does is often preserves the integrity of an assignment to prevent a reassignment for a pilot that's coming through the base. And it's not just a line holder, it's also a reserve who's out on a trip who's flying through their base. So we want to continue to prevent as many reassignments as we can while not taking advantage of one small subset of pilots, the pilots on field standby. So what a contingency reserve is a contingency reserve is a reserve on short call who is called to the airport for a specific flight. They're told ahead of time, your contingency reserve on this trip, you're there to protect flight 1413. They're coming from San Francisco to LA. Looks like they're going to misconnect. It's not a gut feel. We have language in the contract today under 20G8 today. It's 20G9 going forward that a misconnect is defined as less than 30 minutes connection time between flights. So if that jet is in San Francisco and it's not going to have a 30-minute or more connection here in LA, they can call that a contingency reserve. That crew is, for all intents and purposes, misconnecting. Today, if they don't have a field standby, they can call the reserve to the airport on short call and say, that's your flying now. They were supposed to fly San Fran, LA, and then fly LA, Boston. They're no longer going to make it. Come to the airport, and that's your flying. Today, you can get to the airport. If that crew, if San Francisco has somehow turned it around, or ATC has gotten their act together, and now that crew is no longer going to misconnect, they were going to have a 29-minute connection. Now they have a 40-minute connection. You get to the jet, the other crew is sitting there saying, hey, we're good to go. We can have our flying back. Unfortunately, the way 20G8 today is written, that would cause a disruption to the other crew who's been assigned that, even though they're reserves. And that crew that brought that airplane in from San Francisco is not entitled to their flying back. We see that not infrequently, I'll say. And the result of that is now scheduling has this crew that's available and they're eligible for reassignment under 20F2. And now they've got rights to this crew, often resulting in them having their day off disrupted. We wanted to prevent that as well while not taking advantage of the field standby pilots going forward. So we limit this contingency reserve assignment to happening twice in a bid period. Again, you have to be told before you go to the airport, this is contingency reserve. If you get to the airport and they remove you from that flying because that crew has now repaired their misconnect, now they have more than 30 minutes and they get their flying back, the crew desk has a limitation of 1 hour when the map is green. When I say the map on flying together, there's conditions around the country on our hubs. And if LA is green, they have 1 hour. to find something else for that contingency reserve. Otherwise, they're released. They're paid $5.15 of show no go pay. That's an improvement from current book of 2 hours of LPV for show no go, and they're returned to long call. So there's two changes there. One, it's a benefit to the reserve. No more just field standby at will. No limitation on the number of times the crew desk can do that to you. But also it's to protect the pilots who are out there flying the line, not necessarily line holders reserves as well, but to protect the integrity of trips if you do repair that misconnection. Okay, back to Phil. Benefits.
All right, moving into benefits. We'll start with sick first. Increased accrual, it's going from 5 to 6 hours. We've lowered the trigger from the current 255 value to 170 for rapid accrual. And that can occur if it's one event using a combination of sick or the extended sick bank, which we'll talk about in a moment. It only rapidly reaccrues the traditional sick bank though, and that's still at the 7 hours. Sick flyback, we've added the ability, here the awfulism is a trip that's lost at the end of a bid period due to a sick call. The pilot wants to make that up, there's no time left in that bid period, so now this extends the right to make it up into the following bid period. 95-hour rule, a lot of interest in this and well understood, so I'll spend a little bit of time explaining it here, and I imagine there'll be some follow-up questions later, so I'll try not to get everything because a lot of times it's helpful to hear what the concern is so that it can be addressed directly rather than trying to guess up here and spending half an hour guessing at all the concerns. But the idea here is something that we actually built on our own after looking at what other properties do. American is largely similar to us in many ways, so they didn't really have something to look at, but we looked at what Delta did with their premium pay and their blocking of schedules to pilots that call in sick. And this kind of relates to another topic, which we're happy to answer in more detail if it's necessary for you all. But what is it about Delta sick that's so different than ours that we wanted to keep and improve what we have here on the property today and what American subsequently put into their TA. And those are the limitations that they have. It's not just in their sick program, but in their scheduling program as a whole. They do a lot of things that we had no interest in pursuing here, from much later releases to rights to your flying when you're assigned as a reserve, a variety of issues that commingle with some of the issues that they have that look pretty attractive, like the requirement for green slip before they move their days off for reserves. We took the good part of that. We didn't take the part that at Delta you have to meet with hard time, a certain minimum of the average line value for your schedule to ever get paid those green slips. So they do a look back at the end of the month, and your sick calls affect that. Your sick calls also are virtually tracked to meet the FARs. So as an example, if you have a month that's very close to an FAR limit and call in sick, that time remains as counting towards that so that you can't use it to then pick something else up that has premium. So very important to us to not have those type of limitations, both in the scheduling arena, but also in the benefit arena for sick. So what the 95-hour rule does is it preserves pilot optionality, flexibility. We have a variety of pilots. We still have pilots that are wondering why we don't go back to the old days of having a hard cap and building up time so you can take December off. Right? We're not able to do that, but equally for any pilot that's thinking that was a good idea, like on a personal level, I used to love that. There also are pilots that want to fly a lot. They want to be productive. They want to put as many hours of credit in the bank, and we have right now a contract that allows you to do that to a certain extent. We wanted to maintain that. So the 95-hour rule is a way to get increased sick accrual, which benefits the pilots that need it, especially pilots that have an ongoing issue, maybe it a family issue, be it whatever, but at the same time allow for pilots to choose to continue earning. So if you call in sick, you're not cut out in the month by having a block against your schedule or having an inability to pick up a premium trip later on. The simple requirement of that is that if you want to get paid over 95 hours, you just have to make it up. So a high time earner might end up essentially having a free sick drop. So they'll have a sick drop without any charge actually applied to their sick bank, or a low earner, when I say low, a pilot who's staying at 95 or under, more what we consider kind of the old traditional values, they'll still be able to build up to that sick point and they may end up using a sick call, may still be taking money out of or taking hours out of their sick bank as they go forward. Uh, Complete optionality in that regard. For the ESB, Extended Sick Bank, has three purposes. The ability to use it to supplement your sick bank for a traditional type sick call exists. So it's as simple as not being able to exercise the privileges of your medical. Also to cover the LTD waiting period. Many of you may remember the old short-term disability program we had. This is the replacement for that at a higher effective rate, which I'll explain in a second. Both of these are subject to a 15-hour waiting period. That is a modification of the old historical and also what our competitors have, a 7-day waiting period. 7 days, if you figure roughly 3 hours a day for a 90-hour month, it's about 21 hours. So we wanted something lower than that, but that still provided some protection for a pilot that without this might have a very high hour international trip that would fall into that 7-day period, for instance, versus maybe another pilot that had very low time or no time. It just depended. So this way, the 15-hour was more of a universal balancing, same threshold for everybody. For LTD, if you're in the waiting period, this would still provide you the ability to preload 165 hours towards those 2 months, now reduced. The waiting period for LTD is now 60 days, not 90. And pay a much higher rate than the old 50% STD program paid or what a similar program at our competitors pays. And if you're able to maintain that ESB balance, you didn't need to use it, you had a lot of sick leave, you're able to get through the waiting period without having to use the ESB, you can still access it for plus up during your time on LTD. And there's a lot of language that governs how the restrictions work, but a quick summary, it really is modeled after the Delta Mutual Aid product that you guys may or may not be familiar with, but a separate product. They pay for it additionally. They have company paid LTD. We continue to pay our LTD premiums at a lowered rate now, 25% from the old 35%. Their Delta Mutual Aid product is something the pilots pay for, in our ESB is company paid. So a little bit of a flip-flop there. But the idea is that you can use it for up to a 12-month plus-up period for independent events. You can earn 540 hours. That gives you enough for 3 times through LTD with 12 months of plus-up. You can also do it for shorter periods. The 540 limit is the overall limit, but you can do it a month at a time, 2 months at a time, up to 12 months at a time. And that supplements your income while you're on LTD. W-2 income from the company. So in that case, when we get into questions about the 401k improvements and whatnot, I'll address. A lot of this is tied together. It's hard to address just one topic and not mention all of the tentacles to how it improved something somewhere else. Kin care for all pilots. So the idea here is to extend what you all enjoy if you're here in California to other pilots throughout the system. If you have better protections, and you do in California, and a couple of other states have up-and-coming protections or already have some existing ones, those will always supersede what's in the contract, and that's contractually. So the idea there is to make sure that, for instance, if you see the language, this was negotiated early in the agreement and it's up to a maximum of 30 hours. We were able to get the additional hour of accrual very late in the agreement, which will extend to you all another 6 hours a year. So 36 hours that you can use for kin care, half of the accrual. LTD, benefit cap. We still call it a cap, and the reason we do that is that we have a formulaic approach. We treat it as an insurance product. Every pilot pays the same insurance premium and has a similar benefit package, as it were. It's not based on your final average earnings, the Delta methodology of the 12 highest of your last 36. So everybody here gets up to the 50% post-tax of a wide-body captain, and essentially that's the same uncapped limit at Delta based on 85.5 hours, though, rather than your actual earnings. So we still say cap because it is calculated as a cap, but it is essentially, it's exactly the same, in fact, as if you were to look at the 50% rate that a Delta wide-body captain who happened to earn 85.5 hours per month earned. So it was tied together. It's tied to future pay raises, so that cap will continue to increase over time as pay goes up. Also, unless it's income from United, nothing else is offset. Waiting period reduced to 60 days. Mentioned already, it's equivalent to if a pilot is credited 85.5 hours, how we do that. Now your retirement contribution, that's actually talking about the 401k contribution, will be whatever the rate is. Right now it's 16%, goes up to 17% next year and 18% in 2026. That will be credited to your market-based cash balance plan. I mentioned that if you're drawing the ESB plus up component during that time on your LTD, that portion of it that's W-2 income, you'll be able to actually put whatever that can account for. Again, another math exercise, but whatever you're earning from the plus up, the 15 hours a month, you can put that amount up into the 401k program directly. You have to have earned income from the company to contribute to the 401k. However, anything in excess or once the plus up stops will go into this new product, which we'll talk about in a moment, the market-based cash balance plan. If you have a procedure that's required to get your FAA medical back, the LTD plan will pay for it. You don't have to be on LTD to draw from that. The idea is that if you were to wait long enough and you needed to get that procedure done to get your medical back, you would eventually be on LTD. So the LTD plan will cover getting your medical back, getting that procedure done to get your medical. Continuing with retirement improvements, I already mentioned the contributions. So again, 17% in 24, 18% in 26. Eligible earnings now will include profit sharing and forfeited vacation. Those two components did not receive 401k contributions under current book. And the market-based cash balance plan. That is a location, as it says in the bullet, for excess 401k contributions. So right now, those go into the RHA or HRA or whichever abbreviation we're using right now. This gives another cash or tax-deferred product to be able to maximize the ability to collect retirement contributions. It's guaranteed to have at least a 0% return. I know it doesn't sound terribly interesting necessarily, but the idea is that if you draw money out of this, the company is on the hook for making sure it didn't lose money. So a negative performing market, for instance. You'll have the ability for an in-service withdrawal. So that's an early withdrawal before the 5-year minimum that's part of the plan. So that would affect you if you're starting out and you're going to retire in less than 5 years, or if you're drawing early, I believe. I'm looking at my retirement attorney there. Thank you. Thanks, Dan. It's also part of your estate. So your family continues to benefit from the value that's there if you're not able to. So questions are next. I know we didn't cover everything that is in the tentative agreement, and that's by design. We want to maximize the time for questions and answers. Also, kind of as I touched on before, some of the topics that may be of concern to you, it's better, we have found, to hear the question, hear the concern, so we can address it directly in real time rather than try to guess up front what you might be concerned about. We don't want to be presumptive in that nature, and we want to be directly interactive with you all. This says specifically about compensation and expenses. I think we're fine with the smaller size of the group, that we can take questions on any topics that really come to mind. And I don't know how you guys want to run it. Joel, do you want people to line up at the microphones? Yep. Okay.
So there are 2 microphones, and we'll alternate between those. Some may stand a little longer in a line depending on how big it is. The other thing I want to point out is lunch is ready. We're going to press on through questions but you're free at any time to go to the back room and get a plate of food if you'd like, and there's also plenty of drinks there as well. Sound should be good enough to be able to listen to what's going on while you're doing that, but we'll go ahead and press right into questions if anybody has any. Don't be shy.
Is this on? Good. Question is on trip trading and the pool. Right now, the company can designate however many reserves they deem appropriate. So basically, if we try and trade, we're most days only able to do a day for day, or sometimes a bad day, worse day. Is there anything in the contract that limits the company or places trip trading possibilities other than just day for day. Does that make sense that the pool display for at least my category, 737 Captain, and most categories I see, every day shows red?
So, no, I understand the question. I will give the broader answer, speaking without a scheduling license, and then I will let one of my scheduling licensed associates chime in. So, the idea behind the enhanced see and pull LOA, which is what I think you're asking about, is that it will provide a more sophisticated analysis of what type of coverage is available in a particular category over the multiple days that the trip would cover, rather than the very conservative approach that essentially the company is setting a number that makes it safe over all potential mixes and matches of days. It doesn't even know when it's looking at a particular day, the number of reserves that they're looking at. They don't know whether they're 1 day, 2 day, 3 day, or more. So the idea there is that by having more granularity, it's certainly going to change trading behavior. The idea is it should make it more accurate. So maybe sometimes a particular trade now might not be as easily allowed, but others would be. So I'm trying to speak broadly there. Obviously, we're looking for that to be a general improvement, and that's why the language in the LOA heavily involves the SSC in taking a look at the process that the company is contemplating implementing and making sure that it meets our needs. So I think there's no other specific language to trip trading that was changed other than by making the metric that they're using a more reliable, transparent, accurate measure that should improve those situations where right now an overly conservative setting is preventing trip trading from occurring. Does anybody want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I'll start that. Hey, thanks for being here. Thanks for the first question. So what Phil's talking about is enhanced pool. This was around at Legacy United in the Unimatic days. I wasn't here for that, but I've heard the stories. The idea behind enhanced pool is that they can get in granular detail, the company can see and pilots can see what the exact reserve coverage available is that day. So if there's 20 reserves in LA on the 7-3 Captain list today, they can see very quickly, are those 1 day pilots, 2 day pilots, 3 day, 4 day, 5 day, and then they can adjust their coverage or their trip trading. They can allow more drops in certain silos. For example, if there are 15 of those 20 pilots on reserve today are good for 1 day, and there are not that many 1 day trips in LA, for example, they can allow 1 day drops, knowing that they have plenty of coverage. There's no other utilization for those reserves. That's what happened in the past with enhanced pool. The other thing that we hear, that while we don't have contractual language today in the UPA that requires the company to run by their see and pull settings by us and get our approval, or that we can override that, we absolutely have volunteers from the SSC that are very engaged in that process. One of them is Bob Ruley. He's not here. He's Orlando, or lives in Orlando, but he works on that. Stu Ramsey, who's a LA-based pilot who you may know, 787 FO, has also been very involved in that process. One of the things that they hear, though, when they go to these meetings, and I used to hear as well when I was on the SSC, is, yeah, we get that. We just don't have the tools to effectively set those numbers, so we have to add a buffer. So you're on the 7.3. You know that if you flew the classic 7.3, the approach speed was a little less than the 800 that we have today. Then you had the 900, the straight 900, you had the ER, and it seems that for the MAX 10, when that comes out, we're going to be at 180, 190 knot approach speeds. We know that that's not a requirement to fly that airplane safely, but that's put in there to get the deck angle down to avoid dragging the tail. But what happens is you add 5 knots for this, 5 knots for that, and after a while, you're the fastest airplane coming down the approach. That's what's happened with CM Pool, because they don't have the tools and the granularity to get in there and see, do I have 4 day pilots, 3 day pilots? We're just going to have to jack those numbers up to provide a conservative approach there. And in doing so, the pilots are affected and trip trades don't go through for that reason. So that is the goal of enhanced pool, is the company saying, hey, we have these screws and these boards here and I can't put the screw in the board because I don't have the tool. This provides them a DeWalt drill with 2 extra batteries. And you say, okay, get to work here. That eliminates that excuse off the table if they don't have a tool in place. And then it enables our trip trade experts, our trip trade SMEs, to engage them directly on this, to loosen up, to shake the branches there, and allow them in granular detail to allow certain trips to drop in trip trade. Do you have anything to add, Steve?
There's our third road show, and I'm learning don't follow Andy for questions. So I don't think I have anything else to add.
Well done. You can have the next one.
Test. Yeah, I'm asking this question on behalf of a retired buddy of mine. He took the voluntary 2-year buyout in December of 2020, and he wanted to know if his earnings up through that year might be entitled to retro pay being retired.
2020, sorry. So any W-2 income he had, I think in his particular case for the year 2020, would be eligible for that calculation.
For that 4%. Okay, thank you very much.
Hey, gentlemen, good morning. Thanks so much for your time. Thanks for all your hard work. My name's Clark Conrad. I'm an LA23 captain. My question's about the 8 Foxtrot 12 provision for potential new hire captains being forced to a captain upgrade. It's more like a nuanced thing in terms of how forced upgrades work. If there are still unfilled vacancies, my understanding is that new hires could be pushed into a captain vacancy and then through all the provisions and extra training and whatnot. My question is, if a more senior pilot takes a captain upgrade and there are still unfilled vacancies, is it a first in, first out? So let's say a new hire on January 1st is given a captain award. But then, down the line, March, February, whenever, another more senior pilot takes that upgrade. Now that prospective captain is, pushed down the line a little bit. Is it a 1-for-1 basis, or is it as long as there are still unfilled vacancies, those, that pilot is still beholden to that upgrade if they want it or not?
Right. So there are a couple of layered provisions of work to answer that question. One is that the new hire pilot can elect to keep the eventual upgrade to that vacancy if they want to. So that would satisfy that particular spot. But as far as the other ones that don't elect to do that, the company will be required to continue to offer vacancies. And if you're the junior person left in that list of pilots that's hoping to have that award or assignment removed from you, all of the vacancies would have to be filled. So, and that's how the language reads. But what it means is effectively, it's as you described. They will go in if they didn't get enough takers, they'll remove them in a reverse, in seniority order. Okay. So the more senior pilots will be removed first on down to the last pilot holding it once they were all satisfied.
All right, thank you.
Yep.
Mike Guyman, 78 Captain. 2 questions. If you go into a day off, can you still elect to get the 5 hours of pay, then getting the next trip or wherever you want to place that day off?
So with wide bodies, of course, the restoration will happen at the first instance now, not the second, but you'll still have the option. How does that work?
Are you asking about doing ad pay in lieu of restoration?
Yes.
Yes. So ad pay in lieu of restoration is still available. It does require company concurrence. They have to be willing to concur to that, but it goes from 5 hours of ad pay to 5 hours and 15 minutes of ad pay.
Awesome. Question 2, as far as like your 401k contributions, you'll reach a maximum, I think it's 275,000, that it's going to spill over. So under the new contract, is it going to spill to your RHA, or is it going to go to that new product? Or how does the progression go?
Right. What will it do in the interim, I think is what you're asking. And do you want to address that, Fred?
Sorry, brother. We don't. You can either come up here or go to that mic.
Yes. No. So you get to 275,000. I think it's like 29,500, the maximum you can put into your 401k. Then if you continue to put more money into your 401k, it would spill into your RHA right now. So how does this new product function? How does the spillover work? Does it go to the RHA or to the new product?
Yeah, so the way it'll work is that pilots will have the option. We assume it'll be either an annual enrollment or sometime towards the end of the year where the pilot will elect, I want my spill, the 16% or 17, 18%, depending on the year, where it will go. You can either choose to have it go to the RHA or to the cash balance plan. And then we're hoping that maybe we can also add on like a 50-50 or a 75-25 where you can split your amount. The company hasn't agreed to that, but they're going to try to see if that can be administratively done. That election does need IRS approval. I think we've talked to our consultant. They don't think there's any issue with that because both options are tax deferred. There's no transfer of cash option. So they think that's not going to be an issue, but we might need a private letter ruling. So it's not guaranteed, but we feel really confident that that's going to happen. But the basic story is annually a pilot can choose between the two.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Hi, guys. Mark Russell. In regards to all the scheduling changes, this is going to go back to George and so forth. There's a lot of changes that are taking place, and it's obvious you guys hit everything that you possibly could. I'm just wondering if we've looked at what shifts we might see in the flying regarding stuff like all-nighters. Is it going to migrate from West Coast being a heavy all-nighter operation, going back to the East Coast, especially with the provision of duty periods versus days? And I'm just trying to figure out where things are going to go. I know we do a lot of LA to the islands and an all-nighter to San Francisco, which won't happen. So, yeah, George?
Yeah, I'm not even going to give a preface to that one. Take it, George.
Sure. Thank you, Mark. And first, I'll just start off by saying thank you, Mark Russell, on your local scheduling committee, and does great work. And I would be sorely disappointed, Mark, if you didn't have a question to ask today. So he does a great job every month doing that and really keeps us on our toes. And also, Kyle up here in the front at the MEC level from your local council, he leads up all the efforts for pairing research, a lot of the testings, things that are being discussed here today. So just a huge thanks to be surrounded by folks certainly smarter than my public school education. Anyway, I'll start off by saying, Mark, to get directly to the answer, we did not see any meaningful change in the overall distribution of flying from the sense of, is it pushing additional ANFs to the West Coast? Is it pushing ANFs to the East Coast? I'll kind of start with that. But I think one thing in particular to bear in mind is when you're taking a look and considering all these various changes you're seeing in Section 5, Section 20, things that are driving the trip mix distribution, the quality of trips, things that are organic and inherent to them. Try not to look at any one of those in isolation. When you look at rigs and you look at rules, you always have to consider the impact of how they build upon each other. And that's really the key to having a successful quality trip set that translates into improved quality of life. That's what the team kind of researches as they look through this. For example, a straight change from M5D to M515, really bad things happen. For example, you'll take a large 737 category. If you run it at M515, it organically wants to have about 80% 4 days. That's not really desirable for anyone. But if you back that up with other provisions, you start to bring rigs in there for how it handles things like trip mix distribution. How does it handle sit pay? How does it handle long duty days? Each one of these kind of builds that kind of complete Rubik's Cube that then results in a higher quality distribution. The one thing we did say that was interesting, once we compiled all of these, and for what Mark's talking about, like the 1645 length of duty period following an ANF, the 10-hour restriction on overall length of duty period for unaugmented basic flights, we actually saw that the trip mix distribution and quality of trips improved naturally. So the backstop, kind of the belt and suspenders that you see in there for the trip mix distribution, which I know is very important, particularly to our narrow body folks, that's just kind of a backstop. But actually, based on the initial things we're seeing, isn't even needed because the trip mix distribution the other rigs are driving has actually improved beyond that. So I hope that answers that question.
Yeah, pretty much did. Thank you very much. One other question, or one other section I'd like to get into, a couple questions. The 95-hour based on sick leave, was that an ALPA proposal or was that a company proposal?
So what it morphed into was a lot of ALPA input. It was the company proposal was broader, was along the lines of, if we're going to give you more sick leave accrual in any kind of fashion, we are only going to do it if you will entertain the limitations that are similar to what Delta provides. So our initial answer was, no, we still want the sick leave accrual improvement. We don't want any of those limitations. And those are the specific ones that I talked about with the way that they look at green slip, essentially premium pay, eligibility later at the end of the month as a look back, so you don't even have the transparency up front of whether or not you're going to be able to get the premium pay. And of course, the limitation on not being able to open up your schedule. So what we kept, and I guess the best example would be probably the person this affects the most is a high time flyer in a month, in that you'll potentially be well above 95 hours. You'll have a sick call. Early or late, it doesn't matter because it's all done as a look back. It's not treated differently depending on when you called in sick during the month. So let's say, as an example, I don't know, you had a 120-hour month with a 20-hour sick call, something to keep it above 95. Your pay would drop to 100, or to actually as only down to 100 because you would have made up the sick. It's not going to drop all the way to 95. It's not a hard cap. The difference there, though, is that unless it's at the very end of your month and you have no time left, you haven't done anything to your ability to be able to go and pick something up. Anything that you can do under current book, you'd still be able to do going forward. And that's something that we maintained and preserved along with the improvement and along with the 95-hour threshold. That is harder to do. It's not impossible in all scenarios, but it's almost impossible to do down at Delta under their system. Their sick leave usage is just a matter of sort of a side story. It's actually very similar to ours. It's within a few hours of ours on a monthly basis, and there are probably a variety of reasons why that's true. Our opinion, based upon our observation of how they schedule and how they layer on their restrictions, is that it's available for a pilot if needed, but punitive if they do use it. We wanted to eliminate the punitive part of it and still have the additional value available to a pilot that needs more sick than currently they'd be able to take.
How do you see this affecting maybe reserve usage? Because right now, there are a lot of people that will pick up a trip. I'm seeing, in my theory, people calling in sick, reserve usage going up, company being thin on reserves towards the end of the month and having a lot of premium trips. And if I remember right, premium goes above and beyond still. Is that the case?
Right. So you'll still use premium to make up your sick if you're still in that hole. But if you've made up the sick and you pick up a premium trip later on, that premium is going to be paid to you. Yes. However, because I think you're right, it's a pilot behavior question. Because you still have that sick leave use to make up before you would continue to get any more compensation during that month due to premium or vacation or senior manning. I think those are the three things. There is a disincentive which might drive the premium that the company is considering for other pilots to now have to pick up. It's very possible, and I don't want to speak in any kind of like we think or we believe, because we really just don't know, but it's very possible that the company's reliance on what they see as a mild, because they were fussing at us tremendously that this is all that they got in return for the additional sick leave as far as a moderation to its use. But for all that effort that they think they put into this, they might actually have a worse situation than they have today. They'll be paying more, in other words.
That's kind of what I'm thinking.
Yeah.
One last thing regarding LCPs, LCAs, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
The premium that is added to their flying seems like it's fairly significant. Where did that come from? This is my last question. I'm just wondering how we came to the numbers that we did.
So, in a negotiation, the Delta number is 30%, but only for the actual leg where you do LCP work. If you were, I think the company at one time had offered 15% if we wanted to do the whole trip. And I said, that's not really an improvement, doesn't really cover, the wide variety, the gamut of flying an LCP might do. The 25% was arguably higher than whatever the right middle ground number would have been by quite a bit. And I think that's the number you're asking about. And it was a negotiation. Just kept pushing and pushing to get that number to be as high as we could get, in addition to having it locked in, to basically having it guaranteed.
Over here.
First of all, I want to thank you for your time and to get us where we're at today. My question is concerning base trades or laterals without training. I'm a Newark 777 captain considering going to San Francisco on the triple. Mm-hmm. Can you go over the differences between how it is now in terms of freezes versus how it's going to be? And the follow-up to that is if I get awarded something before the contract takes effect, am I grandfathered under today's rules?
So I'll do the first question. The first question I think is easier. I don't know if I fully understand what you might be looking at in the second question, but we'll get to that. Base trades, of course, are different from laterals in that a base trade, you're looking for a similarly situated pilot on the other side of things to exchange. A lateral requires a vacancy.
Right,
Laterals, right, laterals can happen at any time, you know, there's no real restriction to it. The base
So my
trade-
question
oh,
is
yeah.
laterals then?
Oh, okay. So yeah, that should continue as per current book. There were no.
No changes to
No
that.
changes made to the ability to lateral or no restrictions on lateraling.
Okay, I thought there was a 6-month freeze, but that's for a base trade.
trades.
Okay.
And the attempt there is to isolate situations where that is being abused. And that was actually an MEC request to address.
Okay. Confusion was on my part, base trade versus a lateral. All right, thank you.
Sure.
Good morning. Thank you for everything you've done to get us to this point. The question that I have is with 21D, double D, with respect to the medical freedom, and I know you guys addressed this yesterday in San Francisco. First question is, the AIP language changed significantly, and I know that we have done a good job collectively looking at Delta and American and to compare and try to improve where they were. Specifically, 21 double D, that was the word prohibited in the other airlines, and now it's unilateral with United, and they can't unilaterally mandate something. But my concern is, because I've been on the street once for 6 months, my concern is the next time United tries to mandate something that goes against medical freedom, if they reach out and coordinate with the CDC or the WHO, because they've done that with somebody else. Now, can they not? Does that meet the definition of unilateral? Because they didn't do it, they coordinated with the CDC, and now I'm out on the street again as a seasonal employee at United Airlines. Thank you.
Sure. So I understand the question perfectly and appreciate it. This has definitely caused a great deal of confusion. And the quick answer is that the only outside party beyond ALPA that the corporation would be able to get into cahoots with would be the FAA. So by the language that's in the book, only the FAA could add the requirement to you being able to have a medical issue to you in order for, say, a vaccination to now suddenly be required. Unilateral is between, in our specific negotiation, and we have witnesses that will carry forward. I mean, I may only have 5 years. With the way the laws are changing, Andy and Adrian will probably have 90 more years. And we have our staff attorneys, of course. It is between two parties, and that is the association and the company, and that's the unilateral. If we don't agree that they can do something, then they would be acting unilaterally. It doesn't matter which alphabet organization is suggesting that they do something other than the FAA. That said, it's entirely possible, and the language at American and Delta doesn't really account for this in any way. If some governmental entity, including our own government, said, hey, nobody can operate an aircraft in this country without A, B, and C, there's no language that protects against that because no contract could supersede that. That's an awfulism that, while I think some of us may be concerned about, we just can't protect against that in a contract because that would be overriding. And I think that's potentially the nut of the concern. Unilateral does not give the company the ability, though, to point to the CDC and say, hey, they recommend this. Or maybe they mandate it, the DOT mandates it for travel or something. You will not be required to have that as part of getting a medical, so you would not be restricted from working at United without that. You go into the other parts of the provisions for how you're scheduling and work and whatnot, but you would be here working. The absolute goal was to prevent United from doing what they did during COVID.
Yes, thank you. And that word scares me a little bit because I've seen that used before once. When we came back to international flying, United unilaterally said, hey, you can't fly to these destinations, these 35 destinations, and they restricted flying.
Right.
And looking at the other airlines that didn't mandate what United did, there was only about 6 places that we couldn't fly to. I'm rounding numbers a little bit. So there was 30 places that United said, hey, you can't fly there. So once we were back on the property, we were basically restricted from earning any income because United mandated that. And it took several months for those to walk back to the 6 places. But I've seen that word used before against me from United. So that's why I'm concerned.
And I appreciate that observation. Before I was asked to come back and do this, I was working with the grievance committee on that list of 30 destinations, or 32, I think it was.
Right.
And every time we asked the company, why are you restricting this one, it would magically disappear from the list. So I know about that, whittling it down.
Right. I think when harm was happening to an individual, then they started
Yep.
backing off. So,
Yep.
okay. Thank you, gentlemen. I appreciate your help.
Yeah, you're welcome.
You want to add to that, Nathan? Anything?
No, I mean, I think, I'm Nathan Eisenberg, I'm one of the staff attorneys, and I think Phil nailed it when he was talking about unilaterally. This language was specifically with the goal of making sure that the company couldn't do what they did in the past.
Gentlemen, thank you again for all your hard work. I have a question on unfilled captain seats, but before that, a question on Mark's question about the 95-hour limit, specific to California with the California sick. My understanding is those 30 hours, if we use all 30 hours of California sick, are protected by law. So would it actually be a 125-hour cap? Here in California are states that have similar laws on that cap, that 95-hour cap, just because they are protected by law, if that makes sense.
Right. So the entitlement to the use of the sick, I'm going to look at my attorney as I answer this to make sure I get this right, is absolutely protected. And it's also from any kind of monitoring or any kind of retribution that's in the statute. With regard to the pay, as long as the pay component is handled in a way that's consistent,
but you wouldn't.
Right. So
you wouldn't be paid if you got to that 95 hours. I guess you wouldn't be charged. Also, is my understanding. You're not getting charged sick list, but you're also not getting paid sick list. Is that? And I don't know if we have this information. Is that against California law or not?
Right. So we've had a couple of other California questions related, and that's why I'm looking ahead and want to make sure that nothing has changed. But as long as it's covered in a fair manner, so in other words, if you're not getting paid for it, you're also not getting charged for it, so you still maintain that balance. It's I'll tell you what the unknown there is that I think we're waiting for an answer on, is that if you're not actually decrementing your use of your sick balance, well, when do you get to the point where you've used half your sick balance? So that's the question that we're still continuing to look for. And I don't have an answer specifically for you, I don't think, on that. But as long as it's accounted for in a fair manner, we don't see an issue from a pay point of view with the California law, but they can't have their cake and eat it too. So if they're not paying for you for it, but not charging you, then you still have the balance available.
Okay.
But I don't want to swear to that.
No, I was curious on that.
It's a good question.
When Mark asked the question. Now, as far as the latest snapshot shows.
Well, I was going to add
Okay, I'm sorry.
to that. Is there can't be a situation where there is a benefit under California law where it's better than the contract and you don't get it. If there's a benefit in the law, you get that regardless of what the contract says. So the contract can't override that area of law either.
Okay, excellent, thank you. The latest snapshot again shows every 7-3 except for Orlando with unfilled captain seats. Granted, the TA has not officially passed here, so people might be waiting to make decisions. There's a lot of improvements in reserve and work rules, but we still have the inability to trip trade, the inability to get vacation in the summertime. Even I'm at 45%, 48% in LA, and I still can't get summer vacation. Do we really feel that this contract is going to move and fill this problem? Because that's why people are not moving over to the left seat, and now it sounds like the company's going to try to force new hires instead of more senior FOs who should historically be moving over to the left seat, but won't do it because the quality of life is so bad. Do we think this contract has enough to relieve this problem of these unfilled captain vacancies?
Yeah, excellent question. And our position has always been that we need to fix QWL first before we could ever agree that there's still a problem. And that's why the implementation timeline is set up the way that it is. We need to have all of the, some will be implemented along the way, but there's a big package of items that will be implemented in August, so they can't actually train what we call an accelerated pilot until after that time. They're protected to a large degree by the protections that are in 8F elsewhere for delaying past your activation date or your effective date or the date that you get enough hours to be qualified to go to training. If they were to offer them to the day after ratification, for instance, if they were to start trying to solicit new hires to either be voluntarily take these, be awarded the position, or be assigned the position, since they can't train until almost a year later, they're going to lose a lot of those pilots to displacements, other pay protection scenarios that are contemplated within 8F. So the direct answer, the broader answer to your question is that's been our position, that the work rules will bring more pilots, but we can't necessarily guarantee they will all be unfilled. And that's where the unfilled vacancy provisions that you do see now before you, that's where those came from. It's definitely designed to layer in after all of those other things come into play first.
And I'll chime in and speak to it a little bit. You know, back in February when the company made their first proposal to us, they proposed street captains to deal with this vacancy shortfall, meaning they would hire people and put them right into new hire school as captains. And obviously they got a reply from us that would not be happening. We've been very firm all along that we wouldn't even discuss the issue until we resolve the sections 5 and 20 and work rules to our satisfaction, that the way to incentivize current pilots to bid captain will be to make the work rules of an appetite to go fly them, especially more junior in a seat than they would otherwise be in the right. And so that was the majority of our grind through all these months, was working through all these work rules that you were briefed on, in the hopes that will incentivize enough people to bid captain voluntarily amongst our own current pilot group. What's frustrating, and I alluded to it in my opening comments, is the company, their digital technology group cannot implement all these things immediately, and some of them go all the way into August of this next year. A lot of the reserve provisions that are designed to incentivize current pilots, we also place the restriction on them that they cannot train these accelerated captains until these are in place. So this United Next growth strategy will be impacted by the fact that they drug this contract negotiation into the fall rather than get it done last spring where they should have. So it's tough to say when we get everything implemented, whether this will solve the problem. I guess some of it will be dependent on the sheer volume of the vacancy bids. If we have enough pilots in our current ranks to take the bids or not. Over 30 years, I've never seen this before until a year and a half ago or so. So in normal times, this probably won't be a player, but they are expecting to grow the company pretty dramatically, and we all know what we've seen in the last year and a half. Hopefully, we've taken care of enough of a work rule and quality of life improvements that many more pilots in the right seat will choose to take the bid. I can't promise you that will be everybody, that will take care of every bid.
All right. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Sure.
Hey, good morning, guys. My name's Abel, LAX 75. And as a former rep myself, thank you. Wait, no, this is not easy work. First, a question from a friend, 787 Dulles, asking about how long does a trip need to be offered at 50% premium before rolling a global reserve into days off? How long does it need to be offered?
Yeah, so this is something for implementation. It hasn't occurred yet. But one, it would need to go through a first look run, and that typically takes 7 to 8 minutes between when the trip is in open time and the first look run will be generated to go out. There's always a latency in there that's built in so that the scheduler were to be modifying a pairing, for example, somebody taps them on the shoulder, asks them a question, they get distracted that a pairing doesn't go out the door to open time and to trip trade, that's not the intent. So we would envision this to be 10, 15 minutes max.
Okay, so it's not going to be offered very long before they go into assigning it to reserve.
Yeah, and this is something that speaks to implementation. The key, everything with this contract goes in steps, right? So right now we're in the membership ratification phase. Assuming this TA were to get ratified, the next big important mountain that we got to climb is the implementation phase. And it's critical that we implement everything properly with the intent of the negotiators in mind, and then also that we communicate with the pilot group. That's our job, is to communicate with the pilot group of when an item is implemented, how it has been implemented, how a pilot can obtain the benefit that was negotiated. On the flip side, for the company, how they administer a specific provision. So they're going to need to properly communicate with their crew scheduling team, and we're going to be a part of that. We're just like we have on the system scheduling committee, pilots that are dedicated and work on the network operations center floor to make sure that the company is following through on their part of the bargain to make sure that this is implemented properly. So we will look for opportunities, for example, to make sure that not only that trip be out there for a first look run, but work with the trip trade system to ensure that pilots who are reluctant to do a criteria pickup, for example, that like to have a look at the trip first through an open pairing alert, that they would have an opportunity to see that as well. Because in all cases, taking a volunteer is better than forcing someone to do something undesirable. So that's
Okay.
our intent.
So it's pretty much at the company's discretion, is what you're saying?
What's that?
It's pretty much at the company's discretion how long it'll be available, the trip?
Well, it has to run through a first look run, so that's not that they're.
Missed that part, right, thanks. And my question is, I don't really see this being talked about. Were there any improvements or changes into our health insurance offerings or what we're paying for?
So I can talk about that a little bit, and we do have some, if you have a specific question, we do have experts with us that might be able to help with that. But the premium increases that were part of and the co-pays and whatnot that were part of the agreement last summer were rolled back, so it's back to current book but the rate setting and whatnot goes forward as per current book. But the changes that were contemplated last summer are gone. As far as specific changes, I'm looking for Fred and I can't find him. Oh, there he is, wrong table. I don't think we changed anything in current book, so it's the same plans will be available, same choices.
Okay, all right, thanks, guys.
Yep. Go ahead, sir.
Ken DeGraff, 320 FO from Denver. Just wanted to go back to 21 Double D real quick, and the language for the unilateral. Where is that nailed down? I'm just curious. I appreciate that it is nailed down. I just haven't read it, and I would like to have a little more confidence in it. And the second part of that is, as you know, the unilateral part as one of 354 that was deemed, ironically, statistically irrelevant by United Pass or UAL, our MEC passed that that level of collusion doesn't sit well, and that the FAA was also allowed to completely, that we allowed the FAA to completely bypass their the medical requirements and allow that to happen. So the unilaterally, I appreciate that it is. I'd like to read that for myself, but also that these stop gaps that we have in there have already been violated. So I'm not really confident that they won't be violated in the future.
So I think I understand the first part, and I might have a question back to you for the second part to help me with that. So as far as unilateral goes, it's in the plain language of the provision. We are aware of a third-party attorney that has made a different determination. My opinion, you know, I haven't been in a Holiday Inn Express recently, nor did I go to law school, is that is in more of a broader sense without knowing the specifics of our particular application of the language. I don't know that attorney knows that was a direct negotiation between two parties and that unilateral applies to the two parties, not to any outside entity. And so I think it's mistaken. I'm going to let our legal staff chime in here in a moment and add to that. So that beyond the plain language where unilateral is between ALPA and the association, between ALPA and the company, who are the parties to the agreement, the CDC is not a party to this agreement. And the FAA that's named in the provision, the FAA is the only outside entity that can introduce a requirement that we wouldn't be able to say no to. Now, I mentioned to you the practical application of law, that to the extent that this ever rose again to a legal standard that overrode our contract, there's no contractual provision that you can put into place that can break the law, or they can break a future law if a law is changed. So there's just no way to guard against that. In this particular case, what we're guarding against is what the company actually did the last time. And I think this is your second question, so let me try. The issue here is that the company used their discretion to make this giant collection of restrictions and these decisions that we don't think were done in a particularly mindful way, right? Our competitors didn't do the same thing. And so what the provisions are designed to do, starting off with 21DD and saying that you can't refuse somebody's claim that they're able to work, they're medically qualified to work. So we'll start there, right? They're here, they're on the property, they're able to stay on the property and exercise the privileges of their medical because they meet all the FAA requirements. So that argument is set aside. Now we're looking at that restricted language, and yes, we did look at what our competitors have done, who specifically had a much smaller grouping of restricted destinations, for instance, compared to United's 30 plus at one time, so they started reducing it down to a closer number. They also have agreed to, and American agreed to Delta's language essentially, to bid restrictions and awarding restrictions, but they're unspecified. So even they don't know how they're going to work until this happens again. But they have similar language on bid restrictions and whatnot. And right now they actually, well, all we know is what they did before, which was they chose a more draconian way on the rest of the pilots that are remaining in a category on how to do their awarding. And we don't know that they'll do that again in the future because their language doesn't specify that's how you'll do it, or you'll do it in a different way. So our intent with the language that we have below 21DD and the following provisions that are subsets to it is to have transparency on how that's going to work. And that was something that we worked on with the MEC and was largely taken from existing agreements that we had during COVID. The problem with those provisions was that they were never enacted by the company because they unilaterally, back then, said you can't work here. So that was where at least in our evaluation, is where the true sin was in preventing you from working in the first place.
I think most of it, but just is it a specifically delineated thing that the unilateral is between the parties to the agreement, or you said there's a third party? There is a third party challenge to say we think this might mean something different. I mean, if unilaterally is not determined, and then of course I'll go back to being told to STFU, sit down, take your 4,000 and take the jab. That came from ALPA, so that would be the non-unilaterally portion of that. I would hope that you can see where a group of people don't feel so protected by the word unilaterally in that regard.
Let me try to answer some of this. When we're looking at interpreting what the language means, I mean, first of all, the company may not unilaterally impose a vaccine is incredibly clear. But that even if that was ambiguous, what we would do is we would go back and look at the negotiations and how that language came to be in the contract, look at the bargaining history. And the bargaining history is also very clear, that language is there to specifically prevent the company from unilaterally mandating a vaccine in the future. So the situation is if the FAA mandates it, that doesn't trigger the unilateral. The FAA could mandate that. What this prevents is the company making a decision like they did in the past that they were going to require the vaccine. And this language squarely addresses that.
Okay, but still, unilaterally is not specifically, it's just more of an understood term. Is that what I'm understanding, or?
No, short of, I'll try again, short of the FAA, the only party that would then take the company out of their unilateral loophole is ALPA, is the association.
Okay.
So a future ALPA, because it certainly wouldn't be any of us, well, I'm speaking for my compatriots, but certainly wouldn't be any of us, those that you're looking at here. Somebody in the future would have to say, yeah, that vaccine's okay, and agree with the company that they could impose it. So, and that's always true in a contract, right? We can put the most unambiguous prohibitions in the contract today, but the MEC tomorrow could change them. So that's just the nature of a contract, right? The two parties to the contract are the ones that control it, and that's what the word unilateral is binding upon, are those two parties.
Okay, and that latter part is certainly the concern, is not the MEC now, the MEC future, I would say.
We can't stop them.
Be careful who you elect.
Right. elect
very
good
true.
reps, they'll elect good officers, and we'll continue to make more progress in this area.
And where can we read more about the case, the third-party case that you said on the challenge, just to see what's getting nailed down here?
I think that's what I read. So I think if and again, I take it with a grain of salt. I don't know that the whole argument is being presented in some of that information that is being shared. I don't recall off the top of my head the name of the group, and I hate to endorse them as an accurate source because I don't know that it's fully vetted. I just wanted to know what it is that was concerning people, so I tried to learn as much as I could.
Thanks.
Certainly that's not it. Does anybody, even if you don't have a question, I'm seeing somebody step to the mic here. If there's just a section of the contract that you feel that we have not, or the tentative agreement, excuse me, that we have not adequately explained, you can certainly ask us to visit some section. But go ahead.
Yeah, hey, Alistair Brown, LA737 captain. Just want to say, hey, thanks for all your hard work. I know you guys put a lot of effort into this, and I really appreciate it. My question is a two-part question. On the 10-hour duty day restriction where we get ad pay above 10 hours, I believe you said that's scheduled or actual, right? So if you're scheduled for, say, less than 10 hours, then you go through, say, Newark, and you end up with a 14-hour duty day, you would end up with 4 hours of ad pay. Is that right? Even if it wasn't scheduled that way, it's actual, right? Yeah?
Yeah, that's correct.
And then the second part of that question is, I guess, considering that obviously there's going to be a disincentive to make long duty days, and then I believe I saw somewhere there's ad pay if you sit for more than 2 hours scheduled. What do you see that changing the trips to look like for the scheduling committee? Like, how's that going to affect the pairings? Because obviously I guess they're going to avoid long duty days and long sits if they can, right? Because there's a pretty big financial penalty to doing that.
Yeah, so I'll start and then hand it over to George. These restrictions in the contract, and I'll give you a few examples, like the long sit, the long duty day, middle seat deadhead. These things that we negotiate are not with the intent of having more crappy pairings pay more. The incentive there, like middle seat deadhead, is not that we all deadhead in middle seats and then we get 50% ad pay. It's that the company not deadhead us in middle seats. Same thing with these pairings. So the goal is to create pairings that go out the door that are desirable for our pilots based on their feedback. George can talk about what it's done to the pairing sets there.
Sure. Absolutely. Glad to address that. Just kind of building on what we talked about before, when we take a look at pairings, we have to, and all these various rules and regs, take them in totality as to how they influence each other. For example, here's a statistic based off of last month. Unaugmented duty days greater than 10 hours are probably residing around 57% in the pairing set because there's nothing today to prevent that. That's just what natively is allowed to be built in our UPA. In the world tomorrow, we can't do that. So in isolation, that would be a very expensive rig to deploy, just like M515. It would probably do very bad things to the trip set if that was the only thing that the pairing optimizer, which generates our trips, had to work with. However, when you take that into construct with other rigs and other pairings, so for example, one of the strongest influences we found combating and overriding the 10-hour ad pay provision was actually the 1-for-2 sit time. And that's also one of the largest influences we get, feedback from local councils like yourself, through our local scheduling committee, through the onerous pairing review, is pilots really don't enjoy having to go sit somewhere and have airport appreciation in Omaha for 3 hours. So by now having this rig, that actually mooted by and large the significant influence of the 10-hour duty day. We actually saw a significant improvement in the overall trip mix. A lot of the questions we get on the 10-hour are more isolated to the very senior pilots that enjoy, for example, in New York or DC, and forgive me, I'm sure there's similar trips here, I'm just not as familiar being New York based, like the Caribbean turns, that natively want to be as a one-day trip over 10 hours. The optimizer, I mean, you're talking less than 1%, about 0.07% of the overall trip mix, the influence, what the optimizer has to chase. And there's other things you have to consider, such as do you have to run a crew? What comes to the hotel, the transportation? Is it a tail followed? What happens to the aircraft when you do that? Generally, the other rigs mooted those out, and we didn't see a meaningful change to that. So again, kind of theming back, and a huge credit to Kyle, where there he is in the back of the room. I mean, he spent thankless hours on spreadsheets that made my poor public brain bleed to really make sure that these changes that were made really reflected in a much higher quality trip mix at the end of the day.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, it would seem it will make narrow body flying better, right? Because, you know, you have shorter duty days and not have the long sits, so it should hopefully improve it. And then with some of the other provisions, maybe more days off, correct?
That is the goal, yes.
Okay. Again, thanks for the hard work. I appreciate it, guys.
Hey, whoa, okay. Hi, Andrew Schweitzer, 757 FO here in LA. A couple questions that probably mostly just betray my ignorance. This is my first contract. I've been here about a year and a half. First thing I want to ask, clarifying, just based on what he was talking about, the limitation on ANF legs in the pairing. You said it's only one ANF leg, and I assume that's one ANF leg per trip now, whether it's a 2-day, 3-day, 4-day. Cool. And then the other questions. I noticed in there was something about transfer days, which you can now basically sell back to the company for $5.15, and as I understand them now, they already pay 5 hours a day, which I assume would be $5.15 under the new agreement. Why would I sell back something I'm already being paid for? Is that did I misread it, or is this something where it's ad pay versus PTC or LPV or any of that? Or am I just...
Right, so you have to elect the transfer days to receive the benefit of them.
Sure.
And if you let them go, they get lost.
Mhm.
So this gives you another option if you're not going to use them in the way that they're designed, which is moving between bases.
Mhm.
And the transfer days, there are also travel days that are associated with a paid move, transfer days when you have a change in base but no paid move. This gives you an option to not lose the value of those days if you don't need them.
Okay, so if you take them, you still get paid for them, but if you don't want them at all, you don't necessarily lose out on the money. So it incentivizes people to basically be around, to be available to work, and not take the days off just for the money.
Also, depending on your category, having 3 days that pay $5.15, if there are more valuable trips out there that you could fly, you may elect to have a full month of those versus the transfer days.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
And then my last question is just about the new reassignment limitation to 1 hour if the base is green, and then it's 2 if it's gray or yellow, and then 3 for red or blue. So I understand that that's the map on Flying Together. I understand that's an NOC decision. I've been told those color codes are done at a relatively high level, which is to say an individual scheduler just can't be like, aha, I'm going to reassign this pilot. Boom, this is now red, and now I have longer. But I am sort of curious, just maybe a little background information on basically what's to prevent, at a high level, someone saying, okay, all the bases will just be gray all the time, and then we don't get that. Obviously, we don't realize the benefit of the 1 hour.
No, I think you hit the nail on the head there. So one of the other hats I wear is I'm the crew desk lead at the NOC. I worked alongside Andy for a long time, but I manage a team of pilots and volunteers that work the crew desk. And the reason that we went with the color coding system, one, it's visible to the pilots, and 2 is just as you said, it's a decision that's made at a very high level, and it affects more things than just pilot crew scheduling. It has customer interaction, app, outreaches and tentacles. So we wanted something that was transparent and something that wasn't easily managed or manipulated by the crew desk, and that's where that came from. Some of it's going to be more of an implementation. It's getting that level of detail out to the pilot group of what triggers those, just for your own kind of edification as to what the NOC or the ops manager is looking at when they're making those declarations. But you kind of took the wind out of the sail. You answered your own question, so great job. But thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Joe Gutierrez.
Well, first, I want to say that for a guy that said that he's only been here for a year and a half and it's his first contract, that's a pretty amazing question. So I think we found our new local scheduling committee.
We have a volunteer in some capacity.
Thank you. You're on it. Mark?
Welcome and congratulations.
I just wanted to follow up on Glenn's question earlier about the bidding and the captain and the quality of life issues for unfilled vacancies. And if I could just kind of add a little color to this. One is Garth could speak to one of the data points that we had in a survey that he's shared about whether the contract would perhaps allow for more people to take a captain upgrade. But also, one thing that's interesting is we have to look at the statistics of what are out there. And one of it is, at the moment right now, we have over 2,350 pilots that are on probation. They physically can't bid captain. That's 300 more than the entire group of Frontier Airlines right now. I mean, in addition to that, you have almost like 5,000 to almost 6,000 have been here less than 2 years or something like that. So it's a very transitory issue. And, and for us in LA, we saw the first unfilled captain bid system-wide, and we said, oh, it's mostly a coastal thing because no one can afford to live out here. But now if you're looking at the vacancies, we're seeing big unfilled captain vacancies in Denver and I think even Houston now. So that argument's been taken off the table, that it's a coastal cost of living thing. So it's a dynamic environment. Obviously, this is an unprecedented times we're in with this hiring stuff. But if it went backwards, a lot of these things that some people have voiced concerns about with the new captain thing, but also quality of life, would start to go the other direction. So I just wanted to bring that up. There's just some numbers that, again, what we're seeing now may not be the future, and hopefully the contract can speak to that.
Well, these are the good old days. We will be talking about these days at some point. It can't go on like this indefinitely. But Joe spoke to one of the polls we did, and we asked the question of if work rules are improved and the reserve system improved, would you be more inclined to take a captain bid? And we usually keep these things fairly close to the vest, the data we collect in surveys and polls, because it speaks to our negotiating priorities and isn't something we disseminate. But I ran right to the company with that one because it was 79% respondents. Now, it's still subjective, as how well you improve the work rules certainly will drive how many people will make that decision, and that remains to be seen. But by far, the greatest amount of our negotiating capital, time, effort was to improve quality of work life here. And I hope that you all feel that we did a pretty good job there. But it remains to be seen whether that will actually trigger pilot behavior in the bids to come. I'm seeing empty mics. Okay. Not so much.
Morning. Thanks for your time. Blair Miller, San Francisco 777FO. My question is with regards to date of effective dates on some of these implementations. Can you give us a little bit of an elaboration on, do we have a roadmap now? And also, do we have any recourse if the company states that some of these provisions will be effective and then it slips? Thanks for your time.
So up front, it's in 2301, right? So LOA 2301 in the red line and black line agreements that you have available to you, you can take a look. In the appendix, I think there's only one, it's Appendix A. The implementation timeline is published there. If there's an item that's not in it, it's assumed to be published at date of signing. Effective at date of signing. And I think that's mentioned in the preamble to it. And that's actually our starting position. When we negotiate an implementation LOA timeline with the company, we come in and say, implement everything on day one. And they come back and say, well, we can't do this, we can't do this. Then we go back and forth and we create a structure to it. In this particular one, the value to a reserve pilot was being deferred because of the collection of items that wouldn't be implemented until August. So all reserves will receive a 3-hour plus up to their, is it just as ad pay, I think? Initially until August. And it reduces the 2 hours and 1 hour depending on your availability. If you're fully available for a month or mostly available, it'll be 3 hours. So that's not necessarily punitive, that's just achieving the value, as much of it as we can negotiate up front while we wait for the provisions to come into play. They'll still get some of the provisions very soon, if not right away. Among those, the additional days off, there's some of the mitigations, but they won't get the special lines that we briefed on and some of the other provisions in the assignment ladder. Those won't be in effect until August. If the company goes past August on those particular items, their plus up will go up to 6 hours of ad pay, 6, 4, and 2. And that'll continue until all of those items are implemented. So that is a pre-negotiated added value up front with a penalty if you don't make the implementation day. Additionally, the members that will be overseeing, Andy and Steve specifically from the ALPA side that will be overseeing the company's implementation. They will become suddenly, they thought negotiations were busy. They will be suddenly very busy going and suffering brain bleeds from IT briefings and whatnot to make sure that the company is on track. And there is a dispute resolution process associated with that, where we actually call out particular remedies and whatnot to a neutral, and I can let the attorney speak to why that's important. Typically, you need to actually have suffered some demonstrable harm to get a penalty awarded by a neutral arbiter. And in this particular case, we're actually calling out with agreement from the company that if they miss some of these items, a financial penalty is appropriate. That doesn't sound strong, but it's actually very different than the normal system board process by calling out ahead of time that there's going to be a financial penalty if you don't make these deadlines. That will be our argument to make, and neutral's decision to support.
Anybody?
Okay, we'll continue on then. Help me understand this, how we're rolling into the vacation as far as credit and pay. So say I have a week vacation in January if the TA passes. When I bid, it's only going to be, it's going to look at it, credit 3 hours and 15 minutes as far as how it builds my schedule. But my pay the next month is going to pay those 7 days at 3 hours and 45 minutes. And then the same for the 24, 25, the 375, 415. First, am I correct on that? And second, can I artificially at least put a set in there and say, hey, no, I just want max credit 73 hours or whatever I put in there to kind of say, hey, I'm really going to get paid at 345 and I want to work less and get more pay.
Sure, I'll take this one.
You're on.
Yeah. First of all, thank you, and thanks for showing up. To answer your question is, first, I think you have it correct, right? The implementation schedule of how we're phasing it in. There will be nothing special that you will be able to modify when you tell a PBS. It's just going to know for, this year it's going to continue the same as it is today, 315 and PBS, like nothing's changed. And then next year, like you said, it bumps up to 345. So there's nothing, you can't elect, that's what your vacation is going to be worth in PBS. So that's what's going to get you the extra time off starting next year. There was a third part of your question. Sorry.
Well, then maybe I am misunderstanding it. So for stuff because it says as retro pay or back pay or whatever we're going to define it as, my 7 days of vacation in January, if this TA passes, when I bid for it, the system's going to look at 315. But when I get paid for it the next month, is it going to pay me at 315 or at 345 a day?
Okay, sorry about that. Yeah, so for vacation going forward, starting in I think it's October, November. Yeah, you're exactly right. So your credit will be the 315, but at the end, when you get your paycheck, it'll be worth the 345. So you'll get the 30 minutes extra. For everyone who's taken vacation up to date of signing this year, you'll get at some point. We're still nailing down when it will be paid, but you'll be paid the 30 minutes you're owed for each day of vacation you've already taken this year, and that'll be a separate payment. But yeah, so your pay register will show that your vacation was worth 345 on your pay, but your credit obviously is different from. It will continue to be 315.
Okay, thank you, appreciate it.
Me again. Retro pay. What's the schedule for it?
I'll keep going.
Yeah, that's yours.
Yeah, so the first period, which is the period from what you're owed from 2020 through 2022, it'll be in a check that is tentatively now planned for the last day of October, so Halloween. But the LOA 2301 says it has to be done before November 1st. Reason being is we have to wait till September pay closes to find out how much you worked and you're owed for September. So that's why it's going to be a separate check.
And the separate check is going to be the one after that, that is the last day, November 30th is the planned pay date of that one. And that's for all the retro for 2023. The reason why 2023 has to be broken out from 2022 to two separate checks is the 2023 portion of your retro is going to get PRAP contributions on top of it, so the 16%. And also it's going to count towards the 2023 profit sharing that will be paid in 2024. So that they were, for accounting purposes, they had to separate the two checks out. So those are the dates. So end of October and end of November for the two checks.
Okay, in regards to the pay increases, let's say we ratify this month. When will the first check with the pay raises be headed our way?
All right, so the pay is set to cover the entire October bid period, which remember you always get paid a month later.
Mm-hmm.
So your first check, you'll actually see it would be the November 1st check.
Okay, thanks.
And yeah.
You had no mic? No? Anybody? All right.
Maybe. You're up.
Yeah, I thought it was
Food,
racing
mic,
for the
food,
mic,
sure,
but it turned out it was
mic.
all mine. Huh? Ian Dutton, I'm a 787 FO here in LA, and my question was as far as taunting me into bidding into a left seat position. You gave a little bit of an idea that there are some protections that with the new categories of reserves that basically forces the company to build at least some voluntary long call, but excuse me, you kind of reference that without going into a lot of detail about that. I mean, if you've got a little bit of time and
Sure.
people aren't lining up for
Yeah.
questions, can I throw that out for a little more detail?
So there are actually two requirements. One is there's a formula based on the total number of reserves percentage staffing in the category that dictates how many pure long call lines they have to make. So when reserve staffing in the base is at 20% of the category, they have to, for the pilots on reserve, 15% of them should be entitled to a long call if there are sufficient bidders. Now remember, they can't force anybody into it. On the other side, for the voluntary early check lines, those are the ones that are available pre-10 a.m. that had the ad pay components. Those they have to offer at least, in all cases, 15% of the reserves in a category, as long as the category is a narrow body category that the majority of the flying is basic. So in those categories, they have to. There's no requirement to offer the VSC, the short call lines that are the kin to the early check ones. There's no contractual requirement for them to actually provide those. So they are required to offer the long call, and in the narrow body categories that are majority basic flying, they have to offer the early check.
Okay, and that's really it as far as mandatory requirements for them offer.
That's correct.
Okay, thanks.
Hi, Brenda Tershfield, LA 787 Captain. Thank you for getting us to this point. I'm certain it's been quite a long road for all of you. I have a question regarding the market-based cash balance plan and the opportunity at 59.5 to roll it over to a different investment strategy. And I'm wondering if that is a tax event.
Right, so the ability to roll it over at age 59 and a half is a provision we negotiated really because of the lower equity amount that's in the cash balance plan and the ability for pilots, I know they want to control their own money, and that's part of that. The first provision is to get the ability to withdraw the money, you need to have at least as much money as was contributed. So let's say you had a career, you had $100,000 deposited for you. When you get to 59 and a half, your balance needs to be at least $100,000 before you can get that money withdrawn. So when you move the money, if you just do a qualified rollover to an IRA or to the PRAP, there's no taxable event. It's only if you take it out as cash. Be the same way with the PRAP. So there's a provision now at 59 and a half, you can take all your money out. You can roll that to an IRA, you can take it out as cash, but if you take it out as cash, it's going to be a taxable event as well. I think is there one more?
So just an additional question then. The references, generally, as you know, in investing, you don't want to pull out what you put in. You want to have grown your money over the period of time. So the reference in that you have to have the asset in full before you can withdraw it. I'm wondering why that reference is. Is the assumption that this is just a holding account that's tax-free and not going to grow?
No, so the provision, I guess, when you withdraw the money and then all future withdrawals, because the company's concern at a certain level is that when you retire and you get to age 65, if you didn't take that early withdrawal, if you're underwater, they're going to have to plus you up. So if you put in $100,000 and you only have $90,000, they need to plus you up to $100,000. So what they want to do when you get to age 65 is make your entire account leave. Because if you kept it in there and something happened where the money dropped, and let's say you were now at $110,000 and then the market dropped significantly and now you're back at 90, if you decide to take the money out later on, then the company would have to plus you up. So the goal for the company, and a lot of this, is just to get your money out of the plan as soon as possible so they're never on the hook. So we think it's sort of a mutual benefit to both parties in that pilots kind of want to manage their own money, probably don't want to be exactly in the same allocation as the market-based cash balance plan. And so the ability to move that money out at age 65 is going to have to be a full withdrawal. And so they're going to force pilots to take all of that money out at that time. Now, there is a provision, just to be clear, for the older pilots that are getting near retirement that, like, if this plan goes live, hopefully in 2025, I think is the goal to have it go forward, is that even after 1 year, if you're over 59 and a half, you can take all your money out as long as, right, you're above water. So if you had $30,000 go in, at least $30,000 or above. But if the market had dropped, you're not going to be able to get that money out either until age 65, or if you're still underwater at age 65, they're going to hold that money to try to make that market come back so that you're at least at 100, that $30,000, not an example, at least at that amount for 5 years. So they have that provision. But at any time between 59 and a half and age 65, if you're above water, you can always take that money out.
So how is that managed then? How is that fund going to be managed?
Yeah, so there's going to be an investment committee and there's going to be an investment advisor that's going to help the company investment committee. And the way it's structured in the contract is there going to be at least 30% in equities, and the rest will either be split, that remaining 70%, either in fixed income, also known as bonds, or a more diversified portfolio where they might bring in some real estate or commodities or something like that. And so the goal for the company is to make that a diversified portfolio that will grow and over time not lose any money, because that's their main concern. I think in the negotiations, as you can tell, they're concerned about you being underwater. So the initial pitch was, we want to put that in a government bond, right? That didn't seem like something that the pilots would want. And so we were pushing on getting a lot more equities in there, but that gives them a little more exposure to losses in the plan. So the negotiation, we ended up at 30% equities. But we're hoping that pilots will either A, move the money out at 59 and a half, or B, take a holistic view of their entire portfolio and say, hey, maybe you want to be 75% equities. Well, maybe that would require, hey, I have to take maybe 80% in my PRAP to take into account that there's only 30% equities in my cash balance plan, and then balance it out as like a holistic view of your entire portfolio.
So you mentioned that there's a committee then. Is that committee made up of pilots, of investors, of Schwab, company?
Yeah, so it's going to be company members. So today we manage on the investment committee for the PRAP 50-50 with the company members. And the company members is the treasurer, maybe a corporate finance person and an investor relations person, either VPs or managing directors. And I'm assuming it'd be the same people, but they will have an investment advisor that is one of the bigger firms in America that helps investment committees manage the money, either Willis Towers Watson or Aon, one of the big 4 or 5 big firms in America that advises these large institutional corporations.
So that those names, those people, those places are public? Is that true for like the RHA, et cetera?
Yeah, I can give you the names of the people on the committees for the RHA and the PRAP. We just don't know what it's going to be for the market-based cash balance plan. Just like today, there is a investment committee for the Cal A plan managed by the company with an investment advisor that helps them make decisions for all the different investments that go in there. So we think they're just going to piggyback on that advisor and those assets to give them a very cost-effective, hopefully diversified institutional portfolio.
Thank you.
One more. With the new different kind of reserve lines and so forth, I'm just wondering if there's any change to the obligations on the last day off to check your schedule and that whole thing.
Hey, good morning. Yeah, so the only voluntary check, or the only check you'll have is on voluntary early checks. They'll have an obligation on their last day off. For both the long call only and the traditional reserve line, there's no more obligation to check your calendar on your last day off. You'll just go on reserve at 0001.
You said for other reserve lines, there's no more obligation
No more.
to check
So
on the last
only
day
the
off at all?
voluntary early checks.
Right.
And then Andy can clean up any mess that they left. No. Good. All right,
Great,
well, there you
thanks. Is there anybody else? Okay, well, we will wrap it up here, but that said, many of us are flying on to the next city, but not until, I don't know, 4:30, 4:45, something like that. We'll be hanging out here. If anybody wants to talk with some of our subject matter experts, me, anybody, we'll be here. There is still a lot of food and drink back in the back that we've paid for, and please don't leave here without taking some of it or eating some of it. Thank you for the respectful nature of the questions and your participation. This was a great event. I appreciate you being here and how it went off. So thank you very much for being here. Take care.